Welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Health and Social Care Select Committee at the London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to monitor services provided by health partners in adult social care and review their performance. We also undertake in-depth reviews and witness sessions on specific topics and submit our findings to the decision-making cabinet. My name is Councillor Nick Denys and I'm chairman of this committee. Before we start, I have some important housekeeping for everyone present. Please ensure any mobile phones are on silent. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if a fire alarm does go off, please follow Nikki wherever she goes. Please keep your microphone muted when you aren't speaking, and then unmute to speak, and as chairman I'll call on those to speak. And obviously people will talk about their own topics, but I'm happy for anybody to talk on any other topic. So if one person is talking about something but somebody else feels like that what they want to say is relevant, then please do put your hand up and come in, because it makes for a better discussion. Okay, right, so we move on to the agenda. Nikki, are there any apologies for absence?
Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillor Bennett, and Councillor Banerjee is here as his substitute.
Councillor Banerjee, very welcome to our committee. Are there any declarations of interest in matters before this meeting? No? Fantastic. Aha, now we come on to the minutes. I thought the minutes were really interesting. So, for those who aren't aware, by accident, Nikki attached the minutes for the Health and Wellbeing Board to our paper. But it was a very interesting Health and Wellbeing Board meeting and relevant to what we're doing, so actually it's very useful. And also gives me a good chance to plug the Health and Wellbeing Board, which does meet 4 times a year, as something that we can all attend and watch and observe, or watch online anyway. So in that sense, it was very useful to have. Yeah.
Members will be aware that the minutes were sent round to them shortly after they were actually drafted, so they had a copy previously. So there's no change to what was sent to you previously.
So on that basis, are we happy to approve them? Thank you very much. Okay, fantastic. The next bit is about exclusion of press and public. Everything's in public, isn't it, this meeting? Fantastic. Okay, so we go on to one of our major substantive item of this meeting, which is the health updates. And obviously we have all our health partners here, so thank you so much for coming along and speaking to us. I've got an order here of people who I'll ask to speak and how we'll do it. That person I'll ask will speak, give a little presentation, then we'll ask questions, and then we'll move on to the next person. And as I said before, anybody else can come in on anybody else's subject to make a good debate. So, Vanessa, would you like to go first?
Thank you. And so I'm also starting with an apology that the papers that I attached were also the April 2023 CNWL update, and so thanks to Nikki for printing some copies off for people today, and I'm sure they'll be recirculated, so apologies from me. I'm pleased that it wasn't just me that made a mistake. Appreciating that people won't potentially have had time to look at the paper in full, I'll try and give a bit of a more of a highlight, more than highlights for you, to kind of draw some points out. So if I talk about data first, so data is at the end of the paper, but to talk about some of the things that we're doing well on in terms of our data, our urgent care response, so that's our physical health care response, actually is doing really well. That is above where we should be, and continues to do so even in challenging times. People will have heard about the work we've done around CAMS. We've had obviously a focus about CAMS here before, so I won't talk too much about CAMS, but you'll see that although some of the referrals and treatment, or certainly treatment weights, are going up, we're still in Hillingdon meeting the response times that we set out to do. And also in terms of our mental health patients, we are still ensuring that no patients are going out of area for admission, which is something we're very proud of. To kind of counter that, in terms of what the data is telling us and what we are worried about, are the number of 12-hour breaches that we see in A&E, in the Hillingdon Hospital, of patients who are in there who are waiting for a mental health bed, who have been cleared by for their physical health care, but they are waiting for a mental health bed. From the last quarter, that is showing that per week that can range from 1 patient up to 9 patients per week. and so we are really keen to focus on how we eliminate that and get that down to zero, because that's very important. The other metric to highlight that we haven't met is the IAPT access, so that's the talking therapies access. So that's making sure that we are seeing, we've got a target of 25%, that has increased for us over the last year. We know that there's a national drive to have more people seen by talking therapies and that kind of preventative side of things. And this last month we've just dropped down to 17.9%. And so again, that's a real focus for us, that we've got a really clear action plan with our talking therapies. And when I talk about some of the things that we're actually doing from a practical perspective, I'll touch on what we're doing around supporting IAPT with that. So what have we done? Since I think I was last here, we have set up community mental health hubs. So what we had previously was we had community, we had primary mental health teams and we had secondary mental health teams. We have combined them and we have linked them to the primary care networks. So in an absolute ideal world, our GP colleagues would absolutely know who to pick up the phone to. So we've aligned those teams, aligned those staff to give a no wrong front door. Any patient can come through that front door rather than being turned away and saying, no, you have to go to the primary mental health care team or the secondary mental health care team. So that's been implemented and is in train. We have set up, in conjunction with the Hillingdon Hospital, something called the Lighthouse. So this is a new and innovative model. We set it up in order to support eliminating our 12-hour breaches in A&E. We've set that up. Unfortunately, what we didn't have, and I feel like I'd come here and say this quite a lot, we had the capital, but we didn't have the revenue from the mental health investment standard money at the time to bolster a team to be in there 24 hours a day. What we have been able to fund is an 8 till 8 service. And we have been using the third sector, so our third sector colleagues, to support that service. Our next phase is that we've put a bit of money into the North West London ICB, because we know there is still some mental health funding left, to bolster that team so that it is 24 hours a day and is able to take patients who are more in crisis. At the moment, it only takes patients who need to be, and I don't like this term, worked up before they're discharged, so kind of much lower level. And I appreciate that colleagues from Hillingdon Hospital actually need support with people who are in crisis in A&E. So that's something we're focusing on, and should hopefully, I want that to be up and running well before winter, well before Christmas, so that we can prove that model. We've had one more health-based place of safety open at the Hillingdon Hospital, not the Hillingdon, Riverside, on the Hillingdon Hospital site. So I think I talked about the money we got for that and the capital. So we've increased that by one, and it's actually, we've also renovated the whole health-based place of safety. So it's a much nicer environment than we had previously. The Crisis Cafe has also moved, and it's in a better location where it's more accessible, and we really involved our residents and service users in terms of that place. It's actually on the same site as our crisis house that we'd set up, so it's almost kind of out the back, so there's quite a large garden, there's a separate entrance to it, and the idea is if people are kind of used to going to the crisis house, they'd also feel able to go to the Crisis Cafe as well. So that's something we've set up. The next thing I wanted to talk about that I've noted in the paper is the wellbeing bus. And we have been set a challenge by Armel Thomas, who's a resident of Heathrow Villages, who I met with last year. Her idea was to set up a wellbeing bus, and we took that mantle, and we've been working in partnership in Hillingdon to set up the wellbeing bus. We are on track to set up, or for the wellbeing bus to start at the end of September, all things being well, fingers crossed. On the wellbeing bus, we are going to be having someone from IAPT, so I'll refer back to my point around the IAPT access. We're going to have a member of staff from IAPT, and we hope that by having someone from IAPT on the wellbeing bus, we will be able to increase the access. To start with, the wellbeing bus will be focusing on the Heathrow Villages, because we absolutely recognise that is an area that we need to focus on in terms of access to healthcare. We also have been lucky enough to secure a practice nurse from primary care to come and join us on the wellbeing bus, and it may be something that we grow as we go out and about and find out what the residents, certainly from Heathrow Villages, need and want. In terms of what we're going to focus on next, and I don't want to steal Keith's thunder, we are very much working in partnership on the integrated neighbourhood work. So I've talked about the community hubs and the community hubs that are linked into kind of neighbourhoods. They will be a part of the integrated neighbourhood work, but we'll also be focusing on our physical health community teams being engaged with that. We're also engaged in the end-of-life services to have an integrated hub for end-of-life services in Hillingdon, as well as an integrated model to deliver our MSK services. And hopefully that covers off everything.
Thank you. Just on that last point to do with the health bus in Heathrow Villages, somebody else from Heathrow Villages, Christine Taylor, who I also know watches this committee, so thank you very much, Christine. But she sort of emailed me to mention about the bus, and while she thinks it's a good idea, she has two sort of questions around it. Is it joined up with in terms of local GPs and local knowledge of it being there? Because she was told, I think, I am right in saying that she wouldn't be able to get an appointment for a certain amount of time, and then the bus was there and she was able to walk in, but she wasn't sure if that match-up was happening, which obviously, if a resource is there, then we need to make sure that match-up is happening. And secondly, while the bus is great, is there any possibility of taking the tyres off the bus and making it more permanent?
Thank you for those questions. In response to the first question, and absolutely Christine has also been engaged, and actually when I say engaged and held us to account in terms of what Armel would like us to do, actually they've been absolutely instrumental in helping us hold events with residents in Heathrow Villages to kind of think and talk to wider residents about what's needed. I think in relation to the first question, I think what Christine was referring to was not a bus that's run by any organisation that I'm aware of. So I think I have seen that email, and it's I've been asking some of my team to do some digging around that particular bus that I think she saw in a car park.
So we have a rogue NHS bus in Heathrow Villages. Okay, well, definitely. If you find out any more about that, please let us know, because that is interesting. But in terms of the second point about, obviously this temporary solution is definitely a positive benefit, but is there a move towards a more sort of permanent solution?
So I guess to your point around can we make it stationary, the problem with making it stationary is we'd need a lot of buses, because actually the need, even in Heathrow Villages, the need is very great, and we haven't even gone wider. And the idea of the bus is that we'd be able to actually drive it around and park it up, and it comes to the people rather than people needing to come to it. And that's certainly one of the things that we heard when we went to the Heathrow Villages, is that they felt actually they needed, it was nice that people had come to them. So that's something that I'm keen to keep hold of in terms of the bus.
Sue just wanted to come in.
Thank you. Just following on from question one, actually. So our and Rita may want to get involved in the answer. Our primary care networks have been developing and are beginning to roll out a whole series of roadshows in their network, and as part of those roadshows we are inviting, so it goes to Vanessa's second point, we are inviting the bus to come along on the day the PCN has the roadshow and get involved in the roadshow, so then there's a direct link on the day between the bus and the bus services and the wider practices in the PCN. So those networks and links are absolutely being made.
Okay, so next time everyone's coming to speak to us is in April, so I think at that point some feedback in terms of experience and coverage will be really, really useful, because obviously if this is making a positive difference, then it'd be really good to know about it, and also if it's not, what lessons we can learn from it. My last question before I open up to everyone else on the committee is, obviously last time we met I don't know if it was in this forum or if it's another forum, but certainly Vanessa, you were part of this conversation. We were talking about the potential impact of the police no longer attending mental health crisis issues unless obviously there's a criminal matter or a major safety issue. Now the deadline that the commander of the Met set was end of August, so we're now sort of quite early in, I suppose. But any sort of views, or has there been any impact in this new way of policing?
Yes, so in terms of the date that was set, actually there was some communication that went out from the Met Police that have extended the date until the 1st of November in terms of the Right Care, Right Place initiative. So we have a series of meetings set up through our organisation with the Met Police to talk through the practicalities and what that means, so that we're in a really good place by the 1st of November.
Okay, that's good, because my understanding is they're sort of talking about this type of model working well in Hull. I know my colleague, we talked about this, but obviously there was a longer lead time in, and also Hull is very different to London as well. So, okay, so that's interesting. So something to keep our eye on. One might say, though, starting at the beginning of winter is not the best timing either, but anyway, I suppose we can't choose. Right, okay, thank you. Philip, you had a question.
I did. I had two, but you took one of them with the Met Police, so I shall...
Great mind.
I shall come in on something else. It's in relation to the crisis service and the lighthouse arrangement. I just wonder if it's far enough in to get an early sense of what impact it's having in terms of improved outcomes and easing the pressure on other services, or is it far too soon to say that yet? I wouldn't mind any comments on that, please. Thank you.
So I'll talk to the Lighthouse first, and then I'll talk to the other crisis services that we have up and running. I think it's absolutely fair to say that the Lighthouse, that we need to review the Lighthouse model. There have been, which is why I referred to needing to bid for more money so that we could maintain the Lighthouse being open 24/7 and not 8 to 8. But able to take more patients that are in crisis, so expand the staff group. At the moment we have very limited money to be able to open the Lighthouse with a larger staff group in order to take patients who are in crisis from A&E. So I think that's absolutely the kind of honest answer in terms of the Lighthouse. In terms of the crisis house itself, which has obviously been open some time, it has seen excellent increase in patients accessing that. I think the occupancy rate has hit 80%, 75%, and so the outcomes, I think, in terms of all of the patients that have been into the retreat, which is obviously a crisis alternative, an alternative to going into hospital, only one of those patients has been needed to come into hospital. And the crisis cafe, the numbers continue the same in terms of the crisis cafe accessing that. We're hoping that the move that went ahead in August will increase those that access. But that's broadly 15 to 20 people a week. In terms of their staffing, so Hestia run the crisis cafe, they probably wouldn't be looking to see much more than that, but they've maintained that number.
Just briefly, I mean that's encouraging to see in an age where it's very much about improving outcomes, but it's also about showing that you're getting a return on your investment. I suppose one would hope that somehow or other we'll be able to quantify that at some point. If not now, then later on, in terms of people who are not needing more of a mainstream service. But I don't really got anything to say about that. I'll leave it at that, I think. Yeah.
I think a good point, though, Philip, is next time you come and speak to us, maybe a bit more data on this in terms of what impact this and the community health hubs, including the no front door, how that's working. No wrong front door, sorry, not no front. No front door is the opposite of what we want to do. But just to see what impact those are having would be very useful, because I think they're good ideas and they seem to be like what we need. But we want more information about how they're working. I think would be really appreciated.
If I can just come back on the community hubs point, and whilst it's not in the paper, I can tell you that since April to now, the community mental health hubs have seen an increase of 600 patients onto their caseload, so as an entirety. So whilst that's obviously we need to manage that within the teams, that absolutely shows that people are accessing the community hubs more than before. But I will put together some data that shows that for next time.
Okay, thank you very much. June.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Vanessa, for the update on the community bus. My only one question on that is, it's provided once a week. How long will that go on for? Just once a week? Is this something that will continue, or just because of the starting up of these new services, will it be a continuous thing?
So yes, it will be a continuous thing. We want to start off once a week so that we can understand the need and what else we might need to put on the bus, but it is something we're committed. We've got money to continue doing this. It may be that we do need more buses, but we wanted to start off with one bus once a week and build on that.
In your report, you said it's provided by the London Borough of Hillingdon. Will the NHS be having their own bus, or will NWL be sponsoring their own buses or providing their own buses?
So the reason we've gone with the London Borough of Hillingdon is they had one that was available and it fit all the criteria. We wanted to work in partnership with what was already available. So we can absolutely have our own. We could have our own bus, and I know that we've had offers from other organisations to have a bus. We just wanted to get something started, to be honest. And whilst the London Borough of Hillingdon were offering a bus, which I believe we are paying for, then we wanted to start there.
And I got one more question for you on the children and mental health. In your report here, you've got 325 children have had their first appointment, but is waiting for treatment to be started. And from that, you now have 41 children waiting. How did that come down to that level within that time scale? And how many of the 323 have their first appointment and is waiting for treatment?
So just double checking, your first question was how have we managed to reduce the waiting time? Our CAMS team in Hillingdon have launched what we call a quality improvement project because they recognised they wanted to reduce their waiting times. Some of the work that they've done in terms of that piece of work is they've offered some weekend and some evening appointments. They've looked at their skill mix, so they've looked at the kind of clinical staff that are working to see if they can think differently about how they offer appointments or how they offer some of the treatment methods. They've also offered some group sessions as well, so they've just really kind of thought outside the box in terms of offering additional appointments. And I would need to take your second question away in terms of the treatment question. Yeah, I will come back to you on that.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Vanessa. Just on the IAPT figures, so it's disappointing that the target's not being met. Is there any reasons for the increase in appropriate referrals? And I'd be interested to know how you're working towards increasing, getting the target back up to what it was.
Yeah, you're quite right, because actually Hillingdon IAPT normally meet their access targets. This is the first time in a while that they haven't. And we have done some analysis. We really wanted to focus on the kind of action planning rather than looking backwards. So in terms of access, that means that it's not necessarily inappropriate referrals coming through. They've had a look, and it's not that there's more inappropriate referrals. It's just the numbers of people coming through either aren't doing the self-referral or maybe aren't being referred through from primary care or other services. So what we talked about, actually, we had a mental health summit last week, and we have talked about how we, with the health leaders that are around the table, how we can socialise, communicate the IAPT service more, because obviously we do want people to self-refer. They can be signposted from a GP appointment, but they can be signposted from a number of places. So we've talked a bit about how we can communicate much more across Hillingdon.
Okay, be interested how that progresses, and hopefully the numbers can get back up to normal. Thank you.
And hopefully having someone from IAPT on the wellbeing bus from the end of September will also help, because they'll be generating referrals as they're talking to people.
Cecil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vanessa. I've got two questions on two separate things, but just leading on from that on the IAPT. Again, I'm just throwing this out there, as I always do in these committee meetings. I just wonder if there's a correlation between the kind of services that talking therapies offer that don't meet the needs of the people, the mental health patients that are looking for certain types of therapies, which is where they end up in the other kinds of hubs, because you've seen an increase in the community hubs and that. So I just wonder if there's some kind of correlation, because we do look at talking therapies as quite a basic kind of addicted to smoking or all those kind of things, or I don't know, marriages in crisis and all this kind of that kind of help. Whereas actually, what we're seeing in mental health crisis is something quite a little bit more severe, which is why they need access into other places. And I don't know if you've investigated into the correlation between that.
It's a very good point, actually, Councillor. So I will absolutely take that back. I don't know what I would say in terms of there being a correlation. I wonder, because they will also see people who are maybe feeling depressed. I wonder if we did such a large piece of work around the kind of communication in terms of accessing IAPT and talking therapies. I wonder whether, and we did a very kind of huge piece of work around that over winter, and I wonder whether we need to revisit that. But I think that's a good point for us to have a look into those referrals.
Thank you. And just another question, and this may sound a really silly question, but I just wanted to understand what is in a wellbeing bus, because
Are you looking for an invite?
No, I just want to know. I mean, what does it mean? It's like, what can I go and see at my doctor? Can I go and see? What is in a wellbeing bus?
Thank you. It can be whatever you want it to be. I think is the answer from our research. It's not hugely. There's not a huge number of wellbeing buses across the country, but where we have looked to see where there's wellbeing buses, they all do something slightly different. And so I guess the kind of joy of a wellbeing bus is that you really want it to represent, or you really want it to do what the residents of where it's going, what they want. So you could say what we think is needed is A, B and C, but actually where the wellbeing bus is going, they might say, well actually no, we want E, F, G. So actually I think the wellbeing bus needs to be what our community needs it to be.
Okay, so what is happening in Heathrow Village?
So we're going to have someone from IAPT, so someone from the IAPT service on there. We've been lucky enough to have a practice nurse who's going to join us from primary care on the bus. I know that the Heathrow villagers would say they probably want a pharmacy on the bus, but I don't think I can magic that up quite yet. I'll work on that. So we're going to start with a practice nurse. What we really want to do is have someone that would be able to talk to people about whether they've got some anxiety or some depression, and we also wanted someone to be able to do some basic health checks,
like blood
pressure. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, again, obviously, the benefit is potentially it can evolve, and so I'm putting a load of recommendations on you when you come back to us in April. But again, it'd be interesting to find out if that offer has evolved depending on what people have experienced as well. So, and what shape the bus is in by that point. Okay. Sorry, I've got Rita first. I can come back to you though. Rita.
Thank you, Chairman. Vanessa, just coming back to what Councillor Nelson said earlier about the reduction in the point of children's mental health. So you've said that they changed the operating model to work weekends and evenings. Is that going to be a model that they're going to sustain, or is it just something as a short-term fix?
No, it's a model that they're going to sustain and are sustaining. Yes.
June, and then this will be the last question for you, Vanessa, and we'll move on.
I was just going to follow through with what Sutal and the chairman said in regards to the wellbeing bus, what's in it. Would there be a GP service if it does require it? Because in Heathrow villages, obviously there's no GP services in Heathrow villages. Residents have to travel to West Drayton or to Hayes Town. So if that is the request, will there be a GP service on this wellbeing bus?
So that's something I would need to talk to my primary care colleagues about, my GP colleagues about. But I understand what you're saying.
Would it do stuff like flu jabs and things like that?
Yeah, it's a really good idea. Yeah, potentially. I think
it was Nikki's idea, not mine. Okay, it was Armel's idea through Nikki to me. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the flexibility of it.
Absolutely, and that's the idea of the bus, that we want it to be flexible. So it's really helpful to hear from residents and from councillors about what's needed.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Vanessa. I know you have to leave quite soon, so thank you very much for giving us that presentation and answering all our questions. Next, I'd like to move on to the Hillingdon Health and Care Partners. Now, obviously, Keith, you're the person I'm looking to, but obviously there are other people here who have that hat, so I don't know how you want to do it. Who do you want to speak on this before we ask questions? Or okay, so that's good. No, great. So the three of you will talk, then we'll ask questions after that. Okay, thanks. Can you explain what an ECG is? Sorry.
It's an electrocardiogram. That's a recording of the heart.
The new model of end of life is very much based around actually what people need and what their families need, because the reality is when you're talking about end of life, we're not talking about active treatment, we're talking about actual a situation where the individual needs continuing care, but the family and their support network is dealing with anxiety and concerns that they need answers, and they need answers quick. So So the structure is currently at the moment we have some really good services in Hillingdon, but they're quite fragmented, as Keith talked about. And what was interesting, Health Watch did a survey for us about a year ago, and one of the main feedbacks we were getting is people not knowing who to turn to. And when we discharge people from the hospice, sometimes they have between 4 and 7 telephone numbers we're given to the next of kin to call. Which one do you call, at what time, etc. So what we're looking at is how do we actually coordinate this and make it easy for people to actually make contact to us. It's not just the individuals and their families and support networks, but it's also the professionals as well. So this is sort of in 3 sort of main areas. One is looking at early identification. Because what we have been finding, and we've been looking at the data in Hillingdon and North West London, and we've worked very closely from Hillingdon with North West London ICB to look at how you identify people who would benefit from palliative care. Because the reality is, when you look at the NHS systems, it tends to be diagnosis codes that actually drive the data. So we've got this sort of recipe of code now that identifies those people who need would benefit from palliative care. In Hillingdon, we're talking around somewhere between 3,500 people at any one time. So we're focusing on those. What we're also aware is that if you've got a situation of cancer or a degenerative disease, you can actually do a very straightforward or a relatively easy prognosis on. Those people are getting a really good service at the moment because they're identified, they're given up to palliative care teams, etc. Where we're having the biggest issues is around frailty, and where frailty care and support moves from active treatment to palliative care and that deterioration. So what we are looking at now is very much working with the starting to use this database to identify who we should be actually speaking to early. Because the reality is, with end of life, is getting those discussions early with the individuals, talking about treatments, feelings of treatment, what do they want to do with the rest of their lives, what's important to them, talking to the family members with the individuals before it becomes a crisis situation. With that situation, we can then put in a holistic care plan. So it's not necessarily just about medical treatment, it's about loneliness, it's about isolation, it's about anxiety, it's quite often about housing changes, it's about financial situations. So it's looking at that sort of holistic situation whereby what we're doing now is, as well as looking at the integration of the health services, we're also integrating with our other third sector partners to actually improve that support system going through. The second one is maintaining them at home as long as possible, which is what most people tell us they want. So it's actually ensure that once the person is identified, that we will actually do active case management with them and support them for the rest of their lives and their family members. So it's not just looking at them themselves. Because when we're looking, there's a lot of anecdotal and a lot of feedback. It's when a carer becomes anxious, that's when they phone 999. If it's 3 in the morning, etc. So we're looking at a telephone number that will be available 24 hours a day for carers to actually call, and also for people like the ambulance service, etc. Particularly if you've got somewhere you're going to somewhere that's already got an end of life plan in place, etc. Then the third bit is those people who do end up in hospital. It's quite often around frailty. It's around they're going into one situation. It's been identified that they're deteriorating fast, so they have to move that one around. So it's about how do we help pull them as you're looking at a pull and push situation there. So it's not just waiting for the hospital to identify them and to have gone through that process. So what we're doing is that we're increasing the flagging system so that we increase the number of people who are actually getting the universal care plan, which is about their advanced care decisions, so the hospital will know where they are straight away, at which point they will also be able to ring the coordination hub, and we will then actually be involved in actually pulling that back together. So the coordination hub is we're looking at bringing the, as Vanessa was saying, the CNWR services, which is the community-based services. We're involving all of the hospice services as well. We're working very closely with the hospital team as well. So we're looking at a single approach that actually is bringing all together which is a really important period of time in terms of getting the care right at the end of life. You only get a chance to get it right once. If you get it wrong, it is disastrous for family members left behind. And we've based this on what we've learned ourselves, but also what we've seen in terms of best practice around the country.
Thank you. Fantastic. Back on. Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Keith and Steve, so much for that. I mean, when you presented us the model that's on page 26, I think to sort of generalise our comments is like, this looks fantastic. There's a massive difference between paper and reality, which obviously is this will always look like something very good but very hard to do, and you're now in the journey of doing it, which is really interesting to hear about. So I have potentially 1,000 questions, but instead of asking 1,000 questions, I'm going to ask one quite abstract sounding question, but hopefully it won't be too abstract for you. Obviously, when you started on this road, you had a vision about what you wanted. Is there any bits of it that you've learned during the process so far that you've changed because of your contact with reality? And I think some of those difficult discussions you've had with people, which is fine, because difficult discussions are actually part of a good system if you can move on from them. But I was just interested in any sort of learnings you've had since you came up with this beautiful model and then you started dealing with reality. Yep.
And the other thing to add is obviously working with people who are really involved and really want to make a difference. And the other thing is keeping it simple. So like with the neighbourhood development, let's start with district nurses and social care and get that model going, because obviously we're working across organizations that have their own sort of rules, regulations, training needs and all. So on the side, we are also working on the workforce and how can we make workforce work across organizations and creating a passport for them so that we all have the same kind of training, so there's no problem with a person from hospital coming out and working in the community or for primary care to do vice versa. So that's something that we learned, and I think that's the key to get things moving, because you have to address these issues. Unless you address it, no point designing a system where partners are not bought in. So I think that was one of our key learnings as well. And then we looked at, areas that we were all struggling in, so not just primary care or community care or hospitals. This needs addressing, and that's why we bought into this model and are trying to actually make it work.
I mean, what I really appreciate about this is it's very easy to stay in your comfort zone. I can see this is very challenging, but so far what seems to be good is everyone is taking on that challenge, which is I think really worthwhile. I mean, next time when you come and speak to us, it's going to be really interesting, I think, to find out how the common management structure is working. I think that's very interesting, so I'm not going to ask any questions about that, others might, but my final question before I let the rest of the committee come in is to do with palliative care. Steve, as we have you here, I attended a North West London overview and scrutiny committee the other day, and we were presented from the ICS a palliative care strategy, which was I think maybe got this slightly wrong, but about standardising and improving how palliative care works across North West London. What seemed to be very good is a lot of the examples they used were from Hillingdon, actually, in terms of standards that others are trying to meet. But I just wondered, could you tell us a little bit more about that strategy and how it might affect us?
I mean, basically, what the strategy that's come out of North West London is based on national guidance, etc. But it is very similar to what we're doing in Hillingdon already. I mean, we've, as Hillingdon partners right across the services, we've been very much involved in shaping that service. And in fact, we are, with the coordination hub and some of the stuff we're doing, we're taking it we're actually taking it a step further than North West London envisaging it to go, and they are looking to us as a sort of test bed to see if we can actually sort of deliver beyond where their expectations were at the moment. And that is because of, we've only been able to do that because of the partnership working, because in other areas, particularly my other hospice colleagues, when they're actually working across more than one borough, or they haven't actually got that development of a partnership where it's not just agreeing to do stuff, but it's actually sitting down when things get really hard and having the difficult conversations about how you're going to achieve this, what's going to change. Somebody has to move. You can't just have all these red lines somewhere. You have to find some way around it. So, and it is very much, as I was telling you, it's very much around the early identification. It's about the planning at early stages. It's about maintaining people at home. And then if they do go into hospital, or if they're wanting to go into hospice movement place or nursing homes, that end of life journey is as best as well good a death as possible, and that their next of kin and their support networks are supported through it. So when you have an ending, that end of life is a positive one for those left behind. Because we've seen it in situations where particularly with our bereavement service, you're picking up a lot of anxiety, the end of a lot of ill health when you've got bereavements that have to do with bad deaths and things that have gone wrong.
Siddle.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to congratulate the courage to alleviate the pressure on the A&E to kind of bring it into the community, because I think that is so overdue and so needed. My question is around resources, because we really know that we have a lack of resources in primary care. So how are we going to be tackling that in delivering what your objectives are, because they are grand and robust and really really needed, but if we're going to take the pressure off of one area and then put the pressure on another area, we've got to balance that with resources. So that is my first question, and if I could just add another question into that, because I'm glad, gratefully that you've identified hypertension as being a major source of ill health, because I think that's across communities. And I wanted to ask, like in something like the wellbeing bus, whether there is a preventative kind of objective in there, which is looking at something like diet, because diet and across different communities, not trying to get people to eliminate their cultural food intake or cultural recipes, but looking at how that they could provide healthier options, as I am currently doing with my mum who has severe hypertension. So so just wanted to kind of put that in there as well. Thank you.
Sorry, so Sue, do you want to come in? And then so I know do you want to come back in on this point before we move on to the next point? So I'll let Sue go first. So.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just adding to that, the other piece of work, Dr. Prasad talked about the passport piece of work that we are doing. So we have identified there are a number of clinical specialists, so pharmacists is one, podiatrists is another, where there are real resource issues. All of our organisations are struggling to resource, to get the staff in. There's shortages of them nationally. So we are really we've begun to understand those specialists and really begin to focus on them and begin to understand what our vacancy rate across HHCP is across all of our organisations collectively. And then that allows us to do two things. One allows us to do recruitment campaigns together, so recruit on a Hillingdon basis, and it's good to work in Hillingdon type tag around advertising and roadshows and going into clinical schools where people are graduating and recruiting them. And then the second piece is using the passport. So where we have got so common training, common agreed policies, all of that, it allows then staff to move. It gives them career development opportunities and fresh experiences and that kind of thing, but it also supports retention there. So it's really part and parcel for those critically endangered specialties where we're finding it hard to recruit, to support recruitment and support retention.
Thank you. Yes, so I appreciated where things were getting funding, but it was the human resources that I was kind of really trying to knuckle down on, and thank you for answering my questions there, Sue, on the on where you're looking at kind of the need for specialities. And therefore, I'm assuming that there will also be opportunities for training in these schools as well, because we need to increase our intake of people in these fields to deliver on this primary care, because even with the recruitment and the funding, if you haven't got the people, none of it matters. So, thank you.
Just nodding this, that's great. No, that's really interesting, and obviously recruitment's a big issue, so to make jobs and careers potentially growth in them is potentially a very good thing. So on the preventative care point.
Yeah. So just to answer your question, so hypertension we are addressing at various levels. One is active case finding, because there are certain people walking around with very high blood pressure who don't even get to come to GP surgeries. So this we are addressing through community roadshows, and every PCN has had, I think we're on our third round. And we started off small, so like 100 people would get their health, your blood pressure or weight or anything checked, to the latest one where we've had 500 people had their blood pressure checked. So that's one aspect of picking up people who've got hypertension. Primary care has been various projects are going on, so you're looking at your data, finding anybody who's had a high blood pressure reading, following them through. So that's another aspect. And the third thing is going out to libraries. So we're working with our local authority and on projects whereby we can set up blood pressure equipment within libraries where people go in and they can have their blood pressure checked, or even a loan system that if you want to take a blood pressure monitor home, we are developing that as well. So that is to get up the pickup rate, plus our local pharmacies as well. So we're jointly starting to address that. From the other aspect of addressing diet and lifestyle, so in these community events, we've actually taken our social prescriber, health and well-being coaches, pharmacists, who have given out, who have talked about healthy lifestyle, how you can reduce your blood pressure, things like your DASH diet, and taking booklets from the British Heart Society, just to distribute it and increase awareness as to what people can do together as well. So I think all these projects together will be able to address hypertension, which is one of our biggest sort of needs within Hillingdon. So we're doing it in a collaborative way and dealing with every aspect of hypertension.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Just a quick comment. I don't know if anybody's watched the New Amsterdam Hospital, but he took it out to barbershops the blood tension, and it was an absolute success. So, thank you.
Well, I suppose anywhere where people are queuing could be good.
Yeah. If I may, just a suggestion, because I'm really excited about this, like, health bus, to be quite honest, and the opportunities that health bus going to provide. And I'm just going to say that where you're going into communities of specific nationalities are in greater, that if there are, especially when you're talking about lifestyle choices, if people are of origins that can offer that, and you've got local people in communities, then that information is seeped in better, I think, from people. So, and they may be able to speak the language or be able to communicate in a different way, and I think that kind of opportunity shouldn't be missed.
So we're working on that. We've got little webinar sort of thing made in different languages. So that started in Hayes and Hillingdon, because you've got different people of different nationalities, and we're trying to broaden the scope of that. So that's something that we picked up. Plus, you need to address the diet in a way that the person, it's acceptable to that person as well. So we are working on that.
I'm going to task Nikki with getting an invite for me and you to go to the health bus.
Yes.
Hint's been taken. Right, Philip.
Thank you. I've actually got three questions, two relating to the sort of main piece we were talking about with the neighbourhood units, and one about the end-of-life care. So I can do all three if that's all right. Just an observation, Keith, to start off with. It's great to see how things are progressing in terms of overcoming organisational barriers, silos, call them what you like. Certainly I remember saying to you when this all started what a challenge that would be. And it's great to see how things are developing. I note that social care are now included as part of this working arrangement. And I'm going to choose my words carefully here. I know the management of social care has been challenging, as we say, in the past, in relation to health partners. And I just wondered what the management arrangements for these social care staff are, whether they're managed directly from the Civic Centre by Hillingdon officers or actually by health partners. I'm curious about how that works. It's great that we're doing it. I'm just interested to know how that's going to work. That's my first one on this.
If they're separate questions, just do them one at a time, because
Yep,
I think that's
perfect.
easier for
Yeah,
answering.
absolutely.
Okay.
Lovely, thank you. And that's really positive, and we will watch that develop with interest, I'm sure, as a committee. My second question for you is, again, coming back to some things we were talking about several years ago. You used to talk to me about the very small number of people accounting for such a large chunk of the spend in the borough. So presumably the sort of things we're talking about this evening include the work that has been going on with care homes, for example, involving people who are prone to falls and highly likely to be admitted to hospital or be readmitted. Is that sort of stuff happening as part of the work we're talking about?
So the falls in care homes, and that has been addressed. So we've had a program, and we had a manager who worked with developing a sort of a training program for care homes as well. So it was based on, and I think the local authority, Sarah Durham, she was actively involved. So with CNWL staff and physiotherapists and occupational health therapists, we developed a program whereby they went out to nursing homes and care homes and actively taught carers. And that program is an ongoing one that is carrying on, and that has kind of, it's to make people aware when to call an ambulance, when not to call an ambulance, and that is going to have an impact. And that's a program that will carry on because staff change within care homes as well. So I think that has made a huge difference. Plus we have a care home service as well, so which we've got a mixture of workforce. We've got care matrons, we've got doctors, we've got occupational therapists, speech therapists, tissue viability nurses, all working together as well. So that element of falls and frailty is addressed by this team, and that prevents a lot of unnecessary hospital admissions. And we are working very closely with our hospital colleagues, the frailty teams over there, who are working actively, and they've put out, they've kind of made a pathway which is followed by most of the care homes now, so that they know when to address, how to address that fall, and which teams to call in for help as well.
Thank you for that. And then my final question, if I may, and this relates to end-of-life care. And this is for you, Steve. I mean, I don't know if you remember me visiting you at Hillingdon Hospice some years ago, wearing an entirely different hat. But I'm just interested in your comment about people's preference when they're asked during the course of life where their preference would be in terms of where they would choose to die. You're saying that it's still very much the preference that people want to die at home. I'm not quite sure whether that's what people say when they're well, or whether they still are of that view when their condition deteriorates. I just wonder what your take is on that, please.
When people are talking about advanced care planning and talking about their preferences well in advance, particularly if you're talking a year or two in advance, the vast majority of people stay home. It does change over time for some people, and to be honest, it depends on what their illness is, how their deterioration works, how comfortable or confident people are about themselves, because actually anxiety grows, etc. So that's where getting in there and doing the right support to make sure that you're dealing with the psychological parts of this as well as the physical side of health treatment is really quite important. But that's the other bit is the services we're setting up, the integrated services we're setting up, and the active case management is about constantly going back and having those conversations. Because having a conversation about what people want to the end of their life is not a once-off thing. It's something that has to keep you revisited time and time again. And the reality is you are still talking, I was saying, we still have a majority of people, the largest proportion of people die in hospital, but I'm fairly sure the majority of people don't want to die in hospital. But some are there because of anxiety. But the next level down is nursing homes, and then home is around that side of things. And then hospice care is quite small because the number of beds is quite small comparison to. Because you're talking about 2,200, 2,000 people die a year in Hillingdon, and about a quarter of those are sudden deaths or accidents and things like that, which will always happen in hospital. But that other bit is you need to work with the individuals to work out what they want, and then try and base it from their point onwards.
June. Thank you, Philip. If I didn't have to say, I'd miss not saying it, to be honest.
This question is a key. You're saying that the hubs that is going to be done in the different chunks of Hillingdon is the one in Hayes. Where in Hayes will this be, and is it able to have the capacity with the growing population of our residents in the area? So where will all this be if it's going to come under one umbrella? Have you identified an area? Where will this be? Because from the numbers and the figures that you gave and the increasing of the population that we have, you will need something that will be able to accommodate that, because I'm looking at it, you will have quite a few services involved in that, not just for blood pressure, not just for phlebotomy, but then it might be for scanning, it might be for other aspect of healthcare that will be required, and not so much hospital-based, but coming into the community. So where will that capacity be? And the other one I had was on the language, the literature for language, but not only the literature, but the bus. Is there provision for people who have English is not their first language? What's there for them so that they will be able to utilize and access that service as well?
So at the current moment, it's at Mead House, but that's a temporary arrangement because that's the facility that we've been given, that our local council has worked with us and made that available for us. The idea is to get the Hayes one probably at a site called the Nestle site. There are two big sites where practice is also being relocated, and that's where this community hub is going to be developed. That is taking a bit of time because there's been a bit of problem with the Nestle's setup as well, but we're working on that one. So the site in Hayes will probably be at the Nestle site. At the moment, it's at Mead House, which is in the center. It's in Hayes, near the Hayes High Street at the moment. So that's where we are functioning. This regarding your question about getting all the service and how big does this facility be, we've got to look at making it multifunctional as well. So not all teams have to be seated there. They could be coming and going, and we have to use the space in a more sort of a constructive way and a clever way, so that we utilize the facility there, but have all our partners visible over there. So yes, they have to be big facilities, and the idea is to have 3 large hubs and 3 slightly smaller hubs, because in these larger hubs we're going in the phase 2, we will be putting in diagnostics. That's where your scanners and all, if that's a possibility, we'll be putting in. So Hayes site will probably be the Nestle site.
Thank you. Rita, you can have the last question for our Hillingdon healthcare partners.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one then. So the hub in Mead House in Ruislip has only been up and running since July. So is it a bit too early just to give us some update on the performance on it, how it's doing? And if not, the next time we meet, could we have some data on, how well it's performing?
I can give you a few initial numbers. So at the moment, we've got 2 GPs working from 10:30 to 6:30, and they are providing about 22 face-to-face appointments, 30 sort of digital appointments, which could be video or telephone consultations, and taking about 4 to 7 appointments from 111 directly, and about 7 to, there's provision for about 14 redirections from UTC. So it's just the start of it. And the idea is to expand the service, not just with GPs, but you could have other workforce members like your pharmacists or your PAs and nursing staff alongside, so that then we can expand it. But it's just started. So at the moment we are just running with 2 GPs at the moment.
Is that per day?
Yes.
Lisa, do you want to come in on that?
At the moment, there is a referral process whereby the GP surgeries can, there's a cross-organizational booking system, so you can actually book into the hub directly. What we are also looking at for the future is whether patients have the ability to book. It's a challenge because you've got to get the digital aspect of it functional, and working it across all the 42 practices is a challenge. But at the moment, yes, we do have a system.
Thank you so much, Keith. Sorry. Okay, you've me quick.
Just a quick question. Where will the third hub be? Because I've got Hayes, Risley.
So basically what we're looking at, the ideal sites for the third hub would probably be in
Okay, interesting. Anyway, Ritu, Steve, Keith, thanks so much. Really interesting update, and we look forward to hearing more. Okay, Patricia, Hillingdon Hospital.
Thank you, and I've got a presentation, so I will see if I can get it to move forward. Where do I have to direct it? It's the down button, not the up button. Thank you. I'm Patricia Wright. I'm the Chief Executive at Hillingdon Hospital. And I was just reflecting before coming here this evening that I first came here in April a couple of years ago, and it felt like quite a dismal, downbeat story that I had to tell about the organisation. And I hope what I'll be able to demonstrate today is that the story is a much more positive story on a long journey. So I don't want anyone to think that we're not serious about this. But what I've tried to do, or got the team to do, is just to give you a few facts and figures. Now, I'm conscious of time. I'm not going to go through all of the slides. Some of what's in the slides is in the text in the papers. But I just thought it would be helpful if I highlighted a few things, because there's some data in this. So I suppose you all know about the trust. I don't think I need to go over that. What is really we're just trying to highlight here is that actually we've pretty much returned back to pre-COVID levels of activity. So the hospital is busy. It's taken us some time to get back to that position because of just changes in the way the estate runs and so forth with COVID restrictions. But really back up to where we were before, and using both of our sites very actively. I'm not going to go through the executive summary. It's here really just to give you an idea of how the various bits of the trust knit together. What that is telling you, though, is that we, and I think I did highlight it at a previous meeting, is that there has been a lot of narrative over the last couple of years about the hospital redevelopment. Hugely important, but it is an end point in a strategic journey for the trust, and it will be the icing on the cake, but it isn't the cake. And therefore what we did last September is that we revisited our trust strategy and said, what is our key focus as we're on that journey to a new hospital? So we revamped our trust strategy, made it much more current, and what I'm going to do is just give you a kind of 6 months update on where we are on delivering the first year of that strategy. So really just to pull out from this, I think it's fairly obvious, but our key strategic objectives are high quality care, that we have a focus on people, that we have a focus on performance. That's a requirement for us as a National Health Service provider. We have to get on top of the money. There have been many questions with various meetings at the local authority about the underlying deficit of the trust and the impact that has on how we provide care. And I'll come back to partnerships. It's a really key plank of our strategy, and then we have a couple of strategic programmes that I just wanted to highlight. So just to give you a summary, the big ticket items for 23-24 are our Cerner implementation. I'll tell you a bit more about that. Delivery of our financial plan and reducing our financial deficit, increasing efficiency and productivity within the trust and working closely with partners around that, and Keith has already highlighted some of that. Delivery of our elective recovery targets and a reduction in our elective backlog. The next phase of Decant and Enable, which is the work towards a new hospital and focusing on improving our staff health and well-being. And that is absolutely wrapped around with keeping a relentless focus on quality and safety of care. So that just kind of gives you a summary of what I'm going to cover. So if I move on to quality, what we've said in our strategies will deliver consistent, high quality, safe and compassionate care. And we want to do that in a way that moves us to a rating of good overall with the CQC, with no criteria being assessed as inadequate. Now, to a degree, some of that is outside our control, because that will only move if we have a full inspection by the CQC. And we've had a number of partial inspections. So we had an inspection in November last year that reported in the early part of the calendar year that was around some issues raised from complaints. It doesn't change our overall score. We had a few actions from that, but broadly they could see some improvements. It's part of the database that the CQC are starting to gather around how they're going to change the way they inspect acute trusts, but we can't influence the change in our score. That is the CQC. Something that we have had recently is on the back of some really serious concerns about maternity services around the country, at Morecambe Bay, at Kent, and more recently at Nottingham. The CQC have a plan, have been commissioned to visit every maternity service in the country. That was supposed to have been completed by the end of March. I think their target now is by about the end of October they will have visited all trusts. They are doing quite detailed reports on maternity services in those trusts, and we were visited at the beginning of August. We've had verbal feedback, and we will get our report from them probably in about another 4 weeks. So just to be aware, that is an inspection that we've had, but every trust is in that. And we take it really seriously. We've got a number of action plans in place in any case around maternity. So we had an Ockenden review. We've got an action plan that is out of that. We're working very closely with our partner trusts in North West London to make sure that we're all levelling up in terms of maternity services. Obviously, the local authority have made comments on our quality report. We have a number of quality priorities for this next year, and we're continuing to work on those. And those are things around things like engaging better with patients, making sure that we've got specific targets around quality. And then probably really quite a key area is the Patient Safety Incident Reporting Framework. So PSIRF is a new national framework for how we respond to things like serious incidents and incidents in general, and making sure that we don't just focus on the worst incidents in the organisations, but we focus on learning from incidents across the board. And it's quite a different way of tackling responses to incidents. So we have a patient safety incident lead. We've got safety champions that have been put in place. It is a bit of an evolving programme, so we've been actually ahead of the piece in terms of getting ready for PSIRF, but PSIRF is being developed in tranches, so we're where we need to be, but we will continue to develop it as more guidance comes out about it. But it is actually quite a big change. It changes the way we report incidents. It means we're going to have to look at our whole reporting system and things like that. So it's a big piece of work, but I think a really important piece of work for the NHS about how we really learn from incidents, that we make sure that we pick up themes, that we're putting in place responses to that and making sure that we learn from things that have happened elsewhere, not only in our own organisation but across the NHS as a whole. So that's where we are on quality. In terms of people, disappointingly, we didn't have a very positive staff survey response. I think it's important to say that we've seen a deterioration in not only our staff survey outputs but also our response rate really since around 2016. I think it does reflect a number of things. I think it reflects changes in leadership at the top and staff feeling that they're not being listened to and that there's always the next change. I think we're starting to see some stabilisation in that because we do have a more stable team at the top. I think it's also in part affected by COVID, so we're no different to the rest of the country. And actually there are some things that are very specific in London. So the ULEZ zone is an issue for our staff. We know that we're starting to see some difficulties in recruiting staff from outside London. We relied very heavily on people coming in from Hertfordshire, particularly for our paediatric services, and those people are saying now, you know, I can't afford to change my car, so I won't be coming to do shifts at Hillingdon. So we are very aware of that. But what we have done, and we've got more work to do on this, but we've done a number of things that are about recognising our staff, putting health and wellbeing packages in place to make sure that we support them in terms of if they've got financial difficulties, if they're very stressed about things at home, they have access to councillors, all of those sorts of things. We're doing very much what a lot of NHS organisations are doing, but we've really upped this year in a number of areas, particularly around staff recognition. So we reactivated our staff awards ceremonies, we've got monthly cares awards, and really we have a thing on our intranet called Shout Out, so staff can nominate and say, you know, the porter that covers my ward was really kind to a patient today and we just wanted to say thank you. And actually staff really appreciate that. So I think you know, we've done a lot, but not as much as I would like, and we've got a big plan ahead of what we can do in terms of the culture in the organisation and trying to think about behaviours frameworks and those sorts of things. So much more to do. We have stabilised our staff survey results, but we are bottom in London for staff saying they would recommend the Trust as a place to work and staff saying that they would recommend it as a place to be treated, and that's a really, really disappointing place to be. It's counterintuitive, because actually if you come to Hillingdon and when we recruit staff, everybody says what a really friendly place it is to work and there's great team working. So there's
Patricia,
also
could I
something
just interrupt you there? What are the turnover stats like? Because obviously that's another indication, isn't it, of staff satisfaction?
So our turnover rate's been coming down. It's around 11%. We're actually not different to other organisations across the sector. Actually 11% is quite good. And you want to reduce turnover, but you also want to have some turnover. So I think once we get to around 9 or 10%, that's probably quite a good place to be. You do want to get some freshening of ideas in the organisation. And actually our recruitment rate's good at the moment. Our vacancy rate's dropping. So there's something that's not quite right, and we haven't quite got to the bottom of it, but we're getting there. If I look at our performance, just some issues here which I think are really positive. So we have been working really hard on making sure that we meet the constitutional standards. And last year we had a huge effort on making sure that we got our elective activity back up to where it was in 1920, and that we had plans to reduce long waiters. And so these two graphs just give you an idea of this year our target is nobody should be waiting over 78 weeks for treatment, and that we should be getting down to no one waiting more than 65 weeks by the end of March. And in fact we only have 2 patients who are waiting more than 78 weeks. We wouldn't have anybody waiting over 78 weeks if it hadn't been for industrial action, and those 2 people that are waiting are people who have made a choice not to be treated within the month. I hasten to add it's been 2 patients for a number of months now, and they are different patients every month, so it's not the same 2 people choosing not to be treated. And we hope that by the end of September we will have nobody waiting over 78 weeks, and we are actually the best performing trust in the sector around that. And the graph on the left hand side just shows you where we are in terms of 65 week waits, and that is our plan and that is actually what we're delivering. So we are actually well on target to deliver ahead of plan, and that's a really good place to be for us. The other thing is that we had a high number of people waiting over 52 weeks for treatment. Our waiting list numbers increased quite dramatically during last year. Actually, that's been an issue across the NHS, but what you can see in the right-hand graph is that by working on making sure that we validate our waiting list, making sure that we treat people in date order, and really focusing on getting our waiting list down, actually our waiting list is very nicely coming back down again. And actually quite a big proportion of our long waiters is in a couple of specialties, one of which is ENT, and actually we share the service with London North West, so it's slightly out of our control in terms of the number of staff we have available to deliver that service. But we've really tackled services where we had pressures and so forth. We have a lot to celebrate, actually. Our theatre utilisation is an area so that we maximise the number of people who can be treated in theatres. Actually, our numbers have increased to well over 80%, and in fact, the team told me this week that we are currently running at around 90% theatre utilisation, which is really very good. So a lot of stuff is focused on how do we make sure with the resource we've got we're utilising it as effectively as possible. And so reducing do not attend rates, making sure that we are focusing on our waiting times. And actually, although we have some long waiters, our average waiting time at month 4 is around 20 weeks, so it's a significant improvement. So the only area that we have concerns about is that our emergency performance is not where we would like it to be. The national target has dropped to 76%, so that's what we're expected to achieve. We're not meeting that yet. And actually, although our performance has improved enormously now that we are running the urgent treatment centre, actually we are still struggling with variable pressures that are making our emergency performance is not as good as it should be. Some of that is about how we triage at the front door, and some of the work we're doing around the hubs will start to have an impact on that. Some of it is how effectively we discharge people at the far end or the end of their pathway, and as Keith alluded to, we had a conversation today about are we doing enough with partners to make sure that people can be moved back to an appropriate care setting as quickly as possible without them being moved on too fast. So it's not about moving people when they're not ready to be moved. Did I jump one? No. So the next one is finance. Key thing I wanted to say was we delivered our financial plan for last year. That was a deficit plan of 5.6 million, but we came in on target. We have a plan to break even this year. We're not quite there in this year, so we are currently projecting a non-break-even position, but that's in part to do with industrial action allowing us not to meet all of our targets and some issues around inflationary pressure, but we have a plan so that's just our prediction at the moment, but we will have a plan to get us back to target by year end. We have a huge savings target for this year, so our savings target for this year is about 18.5 million, but it's a plan that is based on solid data that we are able to monitor, and we are currently delivering that plan. So that's a good place to be at, and it's not a place we've been to for quite some time. And a huge piece of celebration is that we were placed in National Oversight Framework Category 4 in July of 2021. That meant that we've been working with the national team to make sure that we have sustainable financial position and that we've got structures and processes in place that will drive that. And I'm pleased to announce that we heard formally this week that we've been moved from NOF 4 to NOF 3. So we're not complacent about that. We have a journey. We've got a big financial deficit still, and actually, helpfully with Keith's support, we are now starting to recognise that it's a system deficit, not just a trust deficit, but we are very clear about what our responsibility is in the bits that we can change within the acute trust, and we've got some really solid plans to move that forward. So it's a much more positive place to be, but we are not being complacent about that. Very quickly, we've got a couple of strategic programmes. So something that is really important to Hillingdon is that in November we will move to a single electronic patient record. I cannot tell you how important that is for us being able to manage the patient pathway in the acute trust. So at the moment, if you're a clinician in our trust, quite a lot of what we do is paper-based. quite a lot of what we do, you have to log into 6 or 7 different systems, and those systems don't necessarily join up. So on the 6th of November, we will be going live with our Cerner electronic patient system. We will be going live with a system which is what's known as a single instance across the 4 trusts in North West London. So when we go live, if I know that I have a health record at Hillingdon currently, because I had a scan at Hillingdon, I also know that I have a health record at Imperial because I had some treatment at Imperial. Previously, if you saw me at Imperial, you would not know what I'd had done at Hillingdon. From the 6th of November, if I come to Hillingdon or I go to Chelsea, Remit, which is my local hospital, my whole health record will be there. That will make it much, much easier for us to understand what's happening with with all of our patients across North West London. It will also improve the way we transfer patients between the different trusts. And what it will also do, once it's implemented across the 4 trusts, it means that we can actually start to work on variation in practice. There's some really big clinical benefits of us doing this, and it also means we'll be able to link up with WISIC, which is our community health system. So massive, really, really positive thing. Very happy to come back in April and tell you that hopefully it's going successfully. They went live at London North West, about 3 weeks ago, and touch wood, that went very well. So we are hoping that that will be the case for us. And then just to bring you up to speed with where we are, so I think we did report that we'd received local authority approval for hospital plans, and we've now moved forward into referring that to the Mayor of London, and we have had commitment that we are in the tranche of hospitals that will be built by 2030, and as a result of that, the next phase of Decant and Enable is now underway. We've had a year where we've not done very much, but we are starting to move on that. So that's a really positive place to be. Very quickly, just to say, we are very clear as Hillingdon Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust that we cannot be Fortress Hillingdon. We will provide the very best care for our local population if we work in partnership. We've talked about our place partnership, and that is developing really, really well. That should be the place where the majority of our discussions around care happen, because it's for the majority of our patients who need care locally, of which a portion of that care pathway is in the acute hospital. And that's absolutely our commitment to our local hospital, or to our local population, that they should get the best possible service at Hillingdon Hospital when they need care in hospital. However, as part of a national agreement, we have a collaborative with the acute providers in North West London. We've talked about that before, but that collaborative is really beginning to work very well. And as a sort of subsection of that, because we've been working really closely with Chelsea as a buddy as part of our improvement programme, we've agreed that we are making that more formal in terms of we are now able to say Chelsea can benefit from some of the stuff we're doing. We want to make sure that we continue to benefit from some of the work we've been doing with Chelsea. So at our acute collaborative board in July, we announced that we are continuing with a strategic partnership with Chelsea. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say. We talked about the place-based piece. So just in summary, I think we made some really good progress over the last 6 months in terms of efficiency, productivity and our activity. And we've moved to North 3. We are strengthening our partnerships because we know that we will be able to provide better care for our local population. We've had great commitment from the government and from our local authority to the redevelopment of the new hospital, and that's a really positive place to be. We've got a lot of work we're doing around engaging with our staff about making Hillingdon a great place to work. And to be perfectly honest, as some of the things that we're doing mean we've got more to celebrate, it makes it easier to make the staff feel more engaged, because you can't go out and say this is a great place to work, and everybody says, well, no, it's not, because you're under scrutiny for everything. So we're actually starting to have a much more positive message. Our quality initiatives are really about our patient safety infrastructure and making sure that we move forward with that national agenda to make sure that we're continually learning in terms of safety. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask a couple of questions basically based around national news stories and not based on anything I've heard about in Hillingdon Hospital, but very important issues. The first one's about sexual harassment. Obviously, we saw the survey that was published in terms of surgeons, but of course, I think there generally is a, shall we say, a reputation of power imbalances affecting relationships potentially in the health sector. So I just wanted to ask a broad question. I mean, how does Hillingdon Hospital make sure that there is a culture where sexual harassment and any sort of harassment or discrimination is not appropriate?
So, I can first of all say that, to my knowledge, we've not had any issues raised around sexual harassment, specifically around female surgeons. It is something that clearly we will keep a close eye on. Within the Trust, we have a very clear speaking up policy, and part of that policy is that we would want all staff who've been subject to any kind of harassment to feel that they can speak up. There has been more emphasis on speaking up, particularly since the Lucy Letby case. So we, like all trusts, have been asked to go back and check that our policies are fit for purpose. Ours actually has only fairly recently been reviewed, but it's also about us going out and making sure that we give a really clear message to staff that we want to hear that staff have got concerns. So we have a very clear confidential route that staff can raise concerns, particularly if they feel they'll be targeted because they're raising concerns. In terms of bullying and harassment, we've got a really clear bullying and harassment policy, absolutely not tolerant of any kind of harassment, be it sexual harassment, verbal harassment, or all those sorts of things. And we've got good evidence of taking rapid action where we see that. Do I think we've got to the bottom of all of that? No, I don't. Our staff survey does show, like a lot of NHS providers, the staff still do feel that they're subject to inappropriate bullying and harassment. And where I have a particular concern is if it's staff-on-staff bullying and harassment, because that's not acceptable.
Thanks. And my second question, which is sort of related, is about whistleblowing. Just in general, I mean, how are whistleblowers treated, and what's your Hillingdon Hospital's general attitude towards whistleblowing?
So that's the freedom to, what we call whistleblowing is our freedom to speak up access. So we absolutely have an open policy on whistleblowing. So our freedom to speak up guardian has, just to explain the infrastructure, we have freedom to speak up guardian who is accessible to all staff. We have a non-executive director who is the lead for speaking up. We have a very clear escalation process, so if staff try to talk to the manager and they don't get a response, they can then talk to an executive, they can then talk to our non-executive, they can also do it through the speaking up guardian. We try and encourage staff to let us know who they are, because it's often much easier to deal with it if you're able to talk to the individual direct and really get under the skin of what's going on. A number of staff, so we do have whistleblowing cases. Some of them are speaking up guardian deals with them because they're not truly speaking up. They've got a problem with their manager and there's another way of dealing with it. Where they're identified as speaking up, so there are either concerns about patient care or concerns about the individual and how they're being treated, we treat them as confidential cases. We either investigate them internally or we will bring in external investigators if it's something where we don't think that by having someone in the trust doing it that it would be confidential enough. And we do have a few, not many, but a few active cases that we are investigating.
Thank you. Anybody else? Philip?
Just a quick one. I noticed in the London Ambulance Service report we're getting a bit later, there's reference to the new hospital withdrawal procedure. They're reporting it's working well on the London Ambulance Service side. I just wondered what your take on it is from a hospital perspective. Thank you.
Is this in relation... can you explain again what it's in relation to?
Oh, goodness me! I'll pay a fine as well.
Okay. Okay.
The London Ambulance Service report, which is to come, we haven't heard yet, but there is reference in it to a new hospital withdrawal procedure, which went live on in June of this year. and this involves situations where ambulance crews are waiting more than 45 minutes.
All right. Okay, now I understand where you are.
Okay.
So the first thing to say is that we work really closely with our local ambulance service. So because we've got a site at Hillingdon, we work really closely with the team there. Actually, as a trust, we don't have massively high ambulance delays. We did have, when the new protocol came into place, we did have some discussion about was there a risk because our A&E department is not conducive to cohorting people and so forth. So we've worked very closely with the ambulance service, and they are actually, we try to make it that we get people into bays so that they don't wait. Where we do have huge pressures, then we have absolutely managed to cohort patients and release ambulance staff. And actually we do it in a way that is very safe and working in collaboration with the ambulance service. So, I think it's fair to say our 15-minute handover, in particular our 30-minute handover, is pretty good. So it's not been a big issue for us. So we have blips, but nothing that I would say is a major concern in terms of safety.
Thank you. June.
Just quickly, Patricia, there was some concerns from residents about the reputation of Hillingdon Hospital in regards to the services, some of the services provided. And I know we're waiting to get the go-ahead for the new hospital, which all of us is looking forward to. But you said you lowered down in the reporting field with other hospitals. You're below. How are you looking to see how you can lift that dreaded way of I'm not going to Hillingdon Hospital because it's not fit for purpose for me within the community?
So, I mean, if I've understood you correctly, I mean, the issue we've got is actually if people have to come to us, they have to come to us. We are our local emergency service. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that by making it that people don't have to wait so long for their appointments, improving where we are in terms of waits in A&E and in the UEC, and making sure that actually people who don't need to come to us are diverted more to GP services, that we can start to tell a story which is it is a good place to come to, you will be treated well. And I hasten to add, we're not complacent about it, but there are people who still perceive the care they get at the hospital as not being good, but actually I could give you some examples of where it is much better, and that's where we need to start now, saying much more proactively and encouraging our GP colleagues and our community services to say, gosh, the care that you get at Hillingdon has improved so much. So there's also a bit of work we need to do about communicating some of that. I have to say the care is not always perfect, but it is much, much better than it was.
Thank you. Cecil.
Thank you, Patricia, for that. There's quite a lot there and quite a big task ahead as well. I'm really excited about the CERN because I think that it's going to save a lot of time, a lot of stress, and actually alleviate some of that staff heaviness that they feel as they're dealing with any patient, and that might help in raising those bars and raising the levels of how they feel about working at the hospital as well. One thing I wanted to say, is it just local? Is it only with the North West Trust, or is it something that if I was visiting Liverpool, for example, and I had to go into hospital in Liverpool, would that come across, or would that still be totally separate?
I'm laughing because there was those of us that are a bit long in the tooth have lived through various national IT programs for the NHS, and there is a thing called the National Spine, which everybody was supposed to have their data on, and it wouldn't matter where you were seen in the country, your data would be available. That is there for some things, but not for everything. So in terms of Cerner, it happens to be the electronic patient record system that we are buying. Or have bought. There are other EPR systems around the country, so and they don't all join up. But what they do is give us better ability to transfer information between organisations. So as it stands at the moment, the Cerner system that we are operating with will allow us to have a single system across the whole of North West London, but it's not a single system across the whole of London or necessarily elsewhere in the country. What we are, though, is groundbreaking in terms of, I think we are the biggest system that Cerner have implemented. So they're quite excited in terms of being able to demonstrate that you can implement these systems across bigger areas.
And this, again, because the well-being of staff as an employer is really important to me, and just a thought, and maybe, again, putting something out there, that the 18.5 million savings obviously impacts on the amount of work that a member of staff will have to do in terms of capacity. So therefore, does that correlate to staff feeling overworked and unappreciated in that sense, which I appreciate you've put in staff recognition, which kind of comes into hailing that, but that still doesn't stop the kind of one person having to do three people's jobs in lots of institutions now. And coming into with that, I want to put you into a good news story as well, and a spin story of a personal experience as well. And therefore wondering if different departments are facing different kind of issues. For example, I had to go into the paediatrics department, which was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I can't tell you how brilliant they are, how kind they are to children, how really they take the fear out of the children. That was at A&E, and then you go on to the ward and through the surgeons, and then onto the ward, and just, I mean, really, really, they take the time to explain things to the parents, and yet they are overworked, and you know they are running around everywhere. To a point where then there gets to another part of it, which is the care in the night time, which then gets really, really reduced, and I was left on the floor cleaning up my daughter's vomit because nobody else could help me do that. And that kind of then relates to kind of where is there different times of day, there's different kind of hours, working patterns, different departments that face different kind of pressures, and therefore in your analysis of that data coming in your staff survey, is it that some places actually it's okay and in other places it needs a lot more work?
So if I start with the issue about the savings plan. So our savings plan has been put together on the basis that our focus is on improving efficiency and productivity and taking wastage out where there is wastage. Now that sounds horribly management-y language, but if I give you an example, so we have agreed in some of our services that we've been running those services with locum and agency staff because we didn't have enough confidence that we could sustain that service longer term. What we've now done is say, right, let's have a think about what activity is coming through that service. We're running it far too much on an ad hoc basis. There's a premium cost for doing that. If we substantiated that service and got the right things in place, we'll produce a better service and we'll save that premium cost. So a lot of our savings are around substantiating services that we've been having running on a kind of ad hoc basis for quite a long time and saying, if we saved the premium cost, this is the saving we could make. And that's a really big part of our savings plan. So in terms of your question about what does that mean for staff on the ground, for a number of services, they will see better resource services and we're still making savings. In terms of your specific around children's services, what we have in terms of staffing levels is we have what's known as a national safer staffing tool, and we do a daily measurement of services against that staffing tool, but we also do a 6-monthly formal review against the safer staffing tools, and paediatrics is one of the areas where we've recognised that in terms of acuity we're getting higher acuity in children, and that we needed to invest more in the rosters at different times of the day. So that's now been agreed as an area where we will invest more in that. It doesn't help us on a day-to-day basis if we were relying on some of our bank staff coming from outside the area, and they may not come, but we'll then think more innovatively about how we provide services. And then a final thing just to say is that, you know, for instance, with Cerner coming in, there will be a period of time in the learning phase where staff will find it more difficult to use Cerner. Once it's in place, there is the opportunity to say we will have streamlined a lot of really clunky admin services, and there may be opportunities to take savings out, but we've recognised that we need to invest up front in order to disinvest in the future.
My question wasn't about the paediatrics itself, it was more about the fact that in your analysis of the data from your surveys, have you identified different departments have more pressure than other departments, and therefore there is a dissatisfaction from staff because of those pressures that are in those departments?
So the way the survey is broken down, we have a set of questions that we ask, and it is things like, is your team working well? You know, do you feel valued as an individual? Do you work more than your rostered hours? All of those sorts of things. So we have a breakdown of data on that. It's a bit of a mixed picture. One of the things that we're doing, we're just about to relaunch this next year's survey, and last year only 40% of staff responded to the survey. We want to hear from the 60% who didn't respond, because we may get, if we get another, say, 40% who respond, and we're still getting the same results, we've got a big problem. If we've just got the silent majority who are saying, who don't bother to respond because it's actually all right, we'll get quite a changed picture. So, but yes, we do. We look we don't look at individual responses because it's an anonymous response, but we do look at themes in departments, and if we've got specific themes, we'll then go into those departments and work out what's not working.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Maybe you could offer a prize, such as we'll pay your ULIS charge for a year if you respond to our survey. That'll help people. Maybe not, I don't know. Right, thank you. That's as interesting as always, Patricia. Right, Harefield Hospital, Derville.
Hello everyone. In case you haven't met me before, I'm Derville Russell, Harefield Hospital Director, checking first time. It's always really helpful going after Patricia, because a lot of the things and the questions you ask are very applicable to all NHS hospitals, so there is going to be some overlap in our discussions, particularly when I'm talking about things like elective recovery and new patient electronic systems, because we're also going live with a system very shortly. So I'll start with elective. It's a different one, yes. And,
I was about to say, it's the same one. Is it a different one?
No. We're actually going live with Epic.
Okay, so Harefield's a place we can't go on holiday then, if we want to make sure.
But you'll notice, and just to remind you from the top, the very complicated top of the report. So Harefield and Brompton hospitals, as you are aware now, are part of Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, but still form a clinical group, the Heart, Lung and Crit Care Group. So EPIC is being rolled out across all of GSTT hospitals and community services, and all of King's hospitals and community services on the 5th of October. So we are in the final rundown now, and I know people that have worked in organisations, and they say in the last couple of weeks, keeping the show on the road and keeping the place safe, and then making sure that you're safe through the turn on of your new EPR is an incredible bit of work that everyone has to go through. So yeah, everyone's got fairly big bags under their eyes at the moment, and it must be the same at Hillingdon. So starting with elective recovery, when I last spoke to you, I was quite concerned about the fact that we still had an awful lot more people waiting on our waiting list than we had pre-pandemic. That picture has changed for some of our services. So, for example, cardiology, it has come right down, and it's at pretty much the same levels as it was pre-pandemic, which is great. For cardiac surgery, it's not the same picture. We're seeing about 150 more patients on our way. That's not a lot. We take a full day of operating. It's not like vascular or some of the orthopaedics where you might get 6-8 patients in a day. So it takes a lot of theatre capacity to get through these patients. What has helped us is the fact we are part of a bigger organisation now, and we do these services across all our sites, so we work a lot more on the mutual aid. So if, for example, we have a sudden influx of inter-hospital transfers, which are more of the emergency work, we can flex between our hospitals to say, can you take these patients, and can you focus on electives this week, and we'll focus on the emergency work. So that is definitely helping. What we are finding is the split between elective and non-elective stroke emergency in cardiac surgery particularly is still not back where it should be. So we aren't, when you look at elective recovery figures, you go, oh, they're not doing very well. They're not at the 1920 benchmark, which everyone seems to measure. But actually, when you look at our non-elective activity, that's way above the 1920 benchmark. The reason for this, I think we chatted about at the last meeting, we don't know. You could surmise that some of the patients that have cardiac conditions are more sick because they didn't seek help maybe early on during COVID. We don't know. But it is improving, but it's still a problem for us. In terms of cardiology has been a success, but there is one procedure in cardiology that is also a very long case and is at least half a day, which is our electrophysiology, our ablation cases. That wait is still longer than we would like. These aren't considered really acute, urgent patients that need to be done in the next 4 weeks. It's graded on clinical priority. So we are having to do extra lists to try and make sure we keep on top of them. So that is the part of cardiology that is still struggling. With regard to long waiting patients, we're also on target for the national standards, focusing especially in our 52-week waits. Again, we report as Guy's and St Thomas's rather than by site, which is difficult because they have a lot of services with low complexity, high volume that aren't meeting the standards, whereas Brompton and Harefield are nearer to the standards. So it's a bit difficult in sort of looking at the big picture. I put a little bit in about transplant activity because during COVID, you'll know that Harefield is a heart and lung transplant specialist centre and is renowned for that. Our transplant activity just dropped totally, and it dropped for a number of reasons. I think our patients were extremely hesitant to have their surgery. The transplant population are known because of the medication they have for immunosuppression, that, for example, their response to the COVID vaccines is not the same as everyone else. So they have very little, they have some benefit from the COVID vaccines, but not the same as you and I or many other groups of patients we have in our hospital. We still see a higher incidence of COVID with these patients, and actually we still have COVID transplant patients in our hospital that are there in isolation rooms, more than any of our specialties. The other thing that happened in the last few years with transplant is specifically around lung transplant. We had the amazing wonder drugs that became available for things like cystic fibrosis, and we literally saw our waiting list for lung transplants go from here to here overnight, which is fabulous for the patients. But what it did mean is we therefore didn't have as many patients on our waiting list that needed lung transplants when lung organs became available to us. So there has been a big bit of work nationally on lung transplants to build back up the waiting list with a different cohort of patients. So, for example, COPD patients are now having an opportunity to be on a lung transplant waiting list. People with lung fibrosis that maybe previously wouldn't have been such a high priority of transplant are higher. So the numbers are coming up, which is great. I didn't put the 1920 numbers in that table at the bottom of page 33, and it might have been useful. So in 1920 we did 23 heart transplants and 40 lung transplants, and actually our numbers have pretty much swapped around. So we're doing a lot more heart transplants, and actually this year we're forecast to be the highest heart transplant rate that we've done for years, and our lungs is coming back up. So we had our 40th Harefield Hospital fun run to raise money for the transplant unit on Sunday. Extremely successful event, extremely hot day for those people who were running, but there still is a lot of support for our transplant unit, which is fantastic. Industrial action has been the bane of our lives for the last, actually when I added it up, 8 months, which is incredible. This is going to be even more problematic going forward, particularly for medical strikes. So our junior doctor strikes and our consultant strikes to date have happened on different dates. They are now starting to coincide, their strikes, which is going to have much bigger impact. Now, different hospitals have had different problems during the industrial action. I don't know whether it's because ours is a specialist hospital, I don't know, but the junior doctor strikes are the ones that particularly paralyse us, and particularly trying to keep our hospital safe at night, out of hours, at weekends. Our consultant industrial action has actually had much less impact. But the fact the two are now coming together from the strike in September, they're overlapping by a day, and the next strike in October, which is 3 days before our epic go-live, they're coinciding. So that is going to be a challenge to elective recovery going forward. So all we can hope for is that a resolution comes fairly soon, because it is affecting our patients and their waiting time. Other thing I've mentioned was about EPIC. It's called the Apollo program. It's been going on for 2+ years. That is going live. It has a particular benefit for King's and GSTT for research projects, and it particularly, and sort of medical developments, it allows us to have a much bigger database of patients that can then be involved in research to try and find, obviously, solutions to, different care options and health benefits to patients with long-term conditions, which is good news. Our collaboration with Brunel continues in terms of our Brunel partnership, which is fantastic, particularly around recruitment, support for our staff, the health and wellbeing offering, but also educational days and open days, and that's all working really well. I thought it was probably worth me answering the same question, if that's all right, Chair, about the culture and the sexual harassment and bullying. So Harefield and Brompton as an organisation historically, before they were part of GSTT, was always a flagship hospital nationally for something called human factors or ergonomics, and that particularly has a focus on what they call the authority gradient, which is exactly what I think yourself and Patricia mentioned, where if, as an example, I am a Band 5 scrub nurse in theatres and I see something or some comment is made to be by a very senior person, there may be a reluctance to flag it because I'm more junior, they're more senior, but actually human factors basically addresses that and goes, you have as much of a right as anyone else to flag an issue or to go, that isn't acceptable in the way, the way you're speaking to me. That's fine to begin with, and then what happens, the more years that you embed human factors and people see other people doing it, it grows with confidence. In the last year, we've also launched Civility in the Workplace, which is like the next step on from human factors. And we've been working with the aviation industry on this because they are world experts on this. And we actually have now rolled out a train the trainer cascade system, which is happening all across Guy's and St Thomas's, Harefield and Brompton, which is training groups of people in this skill of being able to identify issues, deal with issues early on, conflict, and there's a bit in there about different cultures and authority gradients as well. I'm very passionate about this and actually become a trainer myself, because I think if you've got more senior people saying this is so important that we're giving up the time for it, it sends a very clear message to the rest of the organisation. So I believe there is a lot being done about it. Have we eliminated bullying and harassment? No. In our staff survey, which gives breakdown of different areas, it does show we still have some areas, but what it does show us is where perhaps we might do our next rollout of training, so it does help us focus certain initiatives. And I'll stop there and take questions.
Thank you. No, that was really interesting, and thank you for answering my question at the end by that. No, really interesting to see how organisations which have hierarchies deal with such things. That's very good. My only question really is about sort of Harefield's place within the structure of St Thomas's and Royal Brompton, because it's obviously now part of a bigger structure, but for us locally, we very much value having this specialist hospital where it is. So, and obviously in the past we've talked about things being moved around a bit, so Royal Brompton having the specialist sort of childcare unit and new facilities built at St Thomas. I just wondered, what is Harefield's place within the sort of the new bigger system that you're all part of? I know it's new, it's not that new, but you know what I mean. So what is Harefield's place within that?
So Harefield are in a very unusual situation that in fact they're located, as are Brompton, in northwest London, but actually because they're part of Guy's and St Thomas's, they're part of South East London ICS. So if you think we're different to the rest of the Northwest London Collaborative, but we still are involved in the Northwest London discussions and the forums and the planning, which is really useful. But actually in terms of our capital provision and our commissioning, it comes from South East London. Does that present a challenge to us? I think probably a little bit, and we're working through it, but we are definitely, for example, strengthening our strategy documents going forward to make sure that there is that presence and support for the South East London ICS, but for our North West London patients, which is about 25% of our patients. The rest are national patients that travel to us, but we have a large, they're definitely the biggest, North West London is our biggest group of patients from one geographical area, so we definitely still have a place to play. And actually initiatives we've heard about today, like the buses, we would be delighted to get involved in and have a cardiology expert there as well. And actually a lot of our services overlap because we have such a strong service level agreement with Hillingdon. So for example, a lot of Hillingdon's cardiologists are joint appointments between Harefield and Hillingdon. So we do already work very closely together, and that's going to make it a lot easier going forwards.
I mean, that's good to hear. We're going to need a double-decker bus, aren't we, after this? Truck, yeah, a big truck. But no, that is good to hear. Right, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll declare an interest. I'm a patient of Harefield, so I appreciate the work that's done there. And it's always amazed me over the years about how the work's done there in the condition of the building, etc. And the thing that worries me about being locked in with guys and all the others is the refurbishment of the wards, etc., the theatres. Is anything happening? Is there any plans? I know some work has been done over the last few years.
Yeah.
But are there any future plans?
Yeah. So if I give you, for example, yes, capital is tight across every hospital sector. So South East London is no different to North West London. But for example, we have some facilities that need regular replacements because of the technology advancing and also because it's used so heavily. So if you take, for example, our cardiac catheter labs, which serve a lot of our cardiology and our emergency services, the heart attack centre, they have to be replaced every X number of years, and it's normally between 8 and 10 years. Most hospitals around the country manage to stretch it to 10, and we do as well. But we now have a rolling programme of commitment of capital for all the cath labs across all the hospitals, including Brompton and Harefield, so that there is a programme that every financial year, the next one that needs to be done is replaced. So there is planning being done going far into the future. In terms of the everyday upkeep of the site, that is the bit that I think is maybe a little bit more challenging, and things like our acute coronary care unit, Oak and Acorn Wards, are in a Portakabin building that are approaching the end of their lifespan. Yes, we are having conversations about the traditional way of replacing them, but we're also looking at innovative ways of bringing money into the trust in order to replace them. So it's a definite challenge, and you're right to raise it. Some ways I'm reassured, but it is going to be a challenge going forward, but it is for every NHS organisation, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, I remember I've been a patient for over 30 years, and when I was in there was a load of American and Canadian medics came over to tour the hospital, and they couldn't believe how the surgeons there could work in the conditions, and it's interesting. I'm glad there's things progressing anyway, and as long as it doesn't get forgotten. That's the worry with being in such a big trust. The Harefield sort of forgotten.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Chris, do you want to drive the bus?
I'll happily drive the bus. Yeah, as long as I can get around quickly, I wouldn't have an issue with that at all. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Chris Reid. I'm the Hillingdon Group Manager as part of the London Ambulance Service, covering the Hillingdon Borough. So I think 6 months ago when we last spoke, I was explaining a new initiative that was going on that was trust-wide about the teams-based working scheme, and this is something that's now been implemented. We started on the 21st of August, and there's lots of advantages to it that we're really pleased is now in motion in the group. And I think by the end of the month, every group within London now is in a teams-based working, and it's similar to a police or fire brigade system where we work in watches rather than just individual crews. The main advantage that I've seen in the last few weeks really is just information sharing. They have a meeting, a briefing once a week where their team manager will be able to give updates check on welfare, and sort of have that team ethos embedded in, which is really important on the big acuity calls like RTAs or cardiac arrests where we do need to work as a team. So I've seen a real benefit in that and being able to get important information in the ever-changing medical world quickly out there. One example really is we're going to be introducing a new drug to the service, midazolam, which has now been proven to be much more effective than our previous diazepam in ceasing seizures, and to be able to get that learning out there quickly and the PGD signed. We haven't seen rates like that as quick without the team space working. So really pleased with it so far. A couple of little teething problems here and there, but we're working through them, and we have the advantage of being able to learn from other groups in London who started this scheme much earlier than we did, and learning from them really. So it was quite useful to be slightly later on in the programme. We've touched on this already, the hospital withdrawal procedure. I can't thank Hillingdon Hospital enough really for, and certainly Kirsty Farrell to name specifically how fantastic she has been and how proactive with this. I rang, and I'll explain a little bit more what it's about, but I rang and she was all over it. She was like, yep, we're doing this and this, because it is a big change. And fundamentally, when there is elements of increased pressure or times of increased pressure, we are leaving our patients with the hospital and able to be able to go out and answer the calls that have not got anyone there at all. I must say and agree with Patricia, actually Hillingdon isn't one that we're particularly waiting long. This is all across the northwest of London, so Northwick Park and all the other hospitals, and we're seeing benefits across the whole of the northwest for this, being able to answer our patients in the community that haven't got any clinicians there. This has seen great improvements in our times for that. A few other little points from the last 6 months really. I mean, recently it's not on the update, but last week we were able to agree the contract with military paramedics. So we have a fantastic working relationship with the RAF, where we're able to give them the exposure of calls to get their training up. And they'll be able to provide that response. So we're getting additional staffing really to answer the calls, and we give them the experience. So a really useful benefit for both services there, but we've agreed the new contract in that respect. And that's quite unique to Hillingdon, for London. Hillingdon's quite unique in that we support this programme, and it is going to get spread a little bit more as their paramedics increase within the services. We've introduced more electric Mustangs, so for our FRUs, fast response units, we're really making sure that we're trying to get towards a zero emissions fleet by 2030. Good strong steps in that respect. We've got a very nice shiny car that's responding in Hillingdon. We're very proud of it. We want to keep it as nice as we can. That is ULEZ compliant. Say no more. And other little bits. I think one that's really exciting to me, rather than going through the whole update that I've given, actually, is this new app, the London Care Record, and it touches a little bit about the end-of-life care in the mental health services, because it's really difficult for our clinicians who are called out to get a lot of information about that patient who's not in a position to give their own history. And it's really important that they get that information to make the right choice. It would be too easy for them to just pick them up and take them to hospital. That wouldn't be the right for all our patients. For some, absolutely, but not for all of them. But to be able to make that safe clinical decision, our clinicians need all the information they can get to make sure that's safe, because their condition might be normal for them. It might be that actually they've just been seen recently by their care team, and we're able to look after them in the community rather than taking them to ED. As part of that, it's the London Care Record app that's just launched, and it's really very new. We're just still getting our teams through the huddles, getting up to speed with what that requires. But this is in terms of care plans, specifically for end-of-life and mental health services, that we might be able to get to that single point of contact and get the information we need, so we're not necessarily taking them into hospital, which might not be in their best interest. So that was quite an exciting one for me. The more information our clinicians get to make those informed decisions, the best care we can give to the community. In terms of our performance, really category 1, our response times are always going to be a focus. We had a difficult week last week when the heat, our summer came in that one inconvenient week when all the kids went back. for our staff, but actually it was no surprise that we were particularly challenged in that week. But generally our Category 1 response time still within North West London are below our target of 7 minutes. So that's when the call is connected to actually being there. And 7 minutes is not a long time, so we're very proud that actually we're achieving that. We've recently reviewed our standby points using some data analysis to make sure that we are positioning our cars in the right parts of the borough. We'll continue to review that, as it has actually focused more on the south of the borough, with one car up in Ruislip, but this is what the data is saying, and there's nothing to disagree with it at the moment. We're using data analysis to make sure that we are actually getting these in the right places. We have seen a slight rise in sickness rates. We're keeping an eye on that. We fear it isn't so much COVID related, but I think it might be. And we're encouraging staff to wear the correct PPE, the personal protective equipment when they're on calls, to try and prevent the spread. But I do fear it may be at the start of the rise with that. And another one that's a key metric really for us is the use of alternative care pathways for our clinician. As I was sort of reading through this, and I was thinking, actually, what is our chief target? And it's very difficult because if patients need to go to hospital, they need to go to hospital. So it's not very much so much as getting that figure as low as possible, but as appropriate. And the way that we do this really is again, through fantastic collaboration with the hospital. Dr. Anna Jones has been fantastic on the frailty unit. She came to our ambulance station to give a sort of a briefing and a sort of a lecture really on what they do, and from that our clinicians got the confidence to use that pathway for our frail patients, and to avoid ED admissions where they're not needed. So we're continually trying to strive to use alternative care pathways, and have seen a drop in the percentage of patients that we're taking to the ED by 0.6% from the last time that we spoke. So we're very pleased about that. But it is a difficult metric because if people tend to call 999, they do tend to need to go to hospital. But we try and weed out all the ones that don't, and actually better care in the community. I'll leave it at that there really. One last little metric that I think we are proud of is as well that going through it is 41% of cardiac arrest patients attended by a Hillingdon crew achieved a return of spontaneous circulation. Now I appreciate that's a bit of medical jargon, but actually compare that to the LAS average of 26%. It shows the teamwork within the Hillingdon group of being able to give pre-hospital cardiac arrest care and getting them to a place of definitive care, whether it be Harefield, quite often the case when they're needing immediate angioplasty, or the ED for any other medical issue. It does show a good bit of care by the team at Hillingdon. And I'll leave it at that for any questions.
Thank you. One of the good things about having these regular meetings twice a year, once every 6 months, is we can see these ideas developing from when they're first mentioned as possible ideas, such as the banding into sort of working units, areas rather than individual teams, and also the idea of getting information to your crews quickly about patients to make better decision making. And of course, the decisions you make are about what's needed, but it's really pleasing again to hear this partnership working within the hospital, because obviously everyone has the same interest in making sure patients are treated right. So that's really good to hear. So thank you about that. The only real question I've got actually after your update is something that's been mentioned in the past is staffing issues, potential staffing issues. I mean, how is the staffing levels at the moment?
It is a challenge. 10 years ago, a paramedic would be a paramedic in the ambulance service. Now they can be in a police custody, in a GP surgery, in a prison, and more and more people are realising the skills of them, which actually is a victim of our own success, I think. They are a challenge. We have a fantastic development programme within the ambulance service where people can train in-house. Like myself, I joined as pretty much a driver, an ambulance technician, got trained in-house as a paramedic and continued that way. And that continues with collaboration with a good number of universities, because you now need a degree to register as a paramedic, which is a challenge in itself. A 3-year degree often puts people off actually joining the service. And we've had to recruit overseas as well. We have quite a significant contingent from Australia and other countries in there that have, again, being able to give the experience they want as part of their career going forward. So staffing is a challenge. Retention can be a challenge, basically because people want to progress their careers, and it is a physical job. and lifting people up and down stairs at 3 a.m. in the morning takes its toll on some of our staff, unfortunately. So it's something that's very much of the focus of the ambulance service, to continue the retention, making sure people have development opportunities within the trust so we're not losing them, and giving them the right sort of training that makes them want to stay.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah, Cecil?
Thank you, Chair. I don't actually have a question, but I just want to say thank you.
That's very kind. Thank you.
I
was not expecting that today. Thank you very much.
Always worth stating.
You guys do such an amazing job, and that's not like everybody else does
Microphone.
an amazing job. Sorry. That's not like everybody else doesn't do an amazing job, but I know the pressures that the paramedics get put under. I know how hard it is when you go into people's homes, and you have to make quick call judgments, and often you have the rest of the families around as well who are asking a lot out of you, and I thank you.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sue from the ICS, the Integrated Care System.
Thank you, Chair. So when we came in April, I was asked to update on the delegation of pharmacists, opticians and dentists from London to North West London, and I was asked to come back to this event and update you. I will take you through the pack, but largely to try and largely try and do all the acronyms so that the committee kind of get it and just kind of bring up to speed with where we are. So from the 1st of April 23, pharmacy, optician and dental, so this is your high street pharmacists, your high street dentists and opticians, the responsibility for commissioning and contracting them has moved from London to the local ICBs, and we have taken on responsibility for that. The actual work still happens at a London level, so it is North East London ICB carry out the actual contracting work and commissioning work on behalf of all of the 5 ICBs across London. But essentially the key difference right now is that the budget for those 3 other primary care contractors now sits within North West London. So that is one of the key change. And associated with that then is the representatives, so the local dental committee, the local pharmaceutical committee and the local ophthalmic committee representatives are now members of the North West London Primary Care Board. So the Primary Care Board is now not just looking at general practice as the primary care providers and primary care contractors, but looking at the whole suite of primary care contracting and provision. And that's what it means when we say North West London have begun to embed the new functions into local governance structures. They're actually on the Primary Care Board. And the North West London team have had their first liaison committees with the local dental committee, pharmaceutical committee and ophthalmic committee. So there is really beginning to get a bit of traction on this now. So as I said, the day-to-day business for contract management, performance and payments continues to be run by a team at North East London on behalf of all of the 5 ICBs. But the work is really beginning to begin to transfer down to North West London. So if, before I go on to describe a little bit of that, if I take you to the slide that kind of talks about the services, and because I think that is something the committee will want to know about. So if I put it in context a little bit, in Hillingdon we have 42 general practices, and we have 37 dental practices, we have 28 optician practices, and we have 62 pharmacists, high street pharmacists. So that's kind of a bit of context for you. For the dentist, in addition to the 37 practices, we have 6 community acute and community contracts. So that's for clearly acute dental needs and also community services. So that's largely also kind of orthodontic type work, those kind of more complicated work that can't be done in your general dental practice. Okay, one of the things just to particularly for dentists is dental services are still in recovery following the pandemic. Because of aerosol generation procedures, they were completely shut down throughout the whole period of the pandemic and were much delayed compared to all other services in terms of opening back up again, being allowed to open back up again. And when they were, there was a whole range of aerosol generating procedures they weren't allowed to carry out. So they're really behind in terms of getting annual reviews and all of that kind of thing, calling their patients in and getting dental checks done again. They're really still well behind on all of that. And if you then included in that people who, for the whole period of the pandemic, really struggled to get dental care, and sat on dental health needs, there was a big surge of activity then for dentists to kind of have to deal with. I will try and translate the acronym of UDAs. So that is Units of Dental Activity. So across our 37 dentists, there are nearly 349,000 units of dental activity are contracted across the 37 dental practices, and so that's your NHS care, and essentially that is for your dental checkups and then any treatment and intervention required following your dental checkup. So that is what is commissioned. The thing we've got to, in terms of holding onto the budget, these are national contracts, and so there is actually very little flexibility. So although now we do hold the budget at a North West London level, we have to still comply with the nationally set contracts. So the ability to take money and move it to kind of where we need it to be is we are quite constrained with that. But having said that, the North West London Primary Care team met with Directors of Public Health in July to begin to bring our Directors of Public Health into the conversation and talk about delegation and really begin to think about how we might want to focus on some of our priorities, particularly oral health with our children. We have the reality is across North West London, Hillingdon is no different, London is no different. We have very poor oral health in our children, and how we might maybe shift some funding from towards prevention, oral health prevention in particular, and begin to shift some funding towards underserved communities. So that meeting was in July across all of the Directors of Public Health across North West London. So it's a very early start, very very early days at this point, but that is maybe gives us some flexibility to kind of focus on our underserved communities as we go forward. I just wanted to pick up on some of the services in our pharmacists, NHS services in our pharmacists really beginning to develop and ratchet up. So we've talked a lot tonight around hypertension, hypertensive case finding out in communities, in our general practice, on our bus, in our libraries. But in addition to that, it's in our pharmacists. So they are also involved in hypertensive case finding. So people come in and they can take people's blood pressure and link in then with the local general practice, with the patients registered, and making sure that we're adding to the number of people that we are identifying who have hypertension. The other services are the contraceptive management advanced service, so our pharmacists can provide contraception support and advice and contraceptives. But also the other service is the community pharmacy consultation service. So there is some of our pharmacists have signed up to provide this. So for a whole range of kind of minor ailments and that kind of thing, you can have a consultation with the high street pharmacist rather than your general practice. So this is all still embedding in and getting in, and as we really shape and develop our networks, our integrated neighbourhood networks, as you've been hearing about earlier, particularly our community pharmacists, really key in their neighbourhoods, in their local neighbourhoods, being part of those neighbourhood networks and the services that they'd be providing, being part of that. The other thing, linking through to the ambulance and 111, over the weekend, some of our pharmacists are providing emergency cover. So if you have run out of your prescribed medication, and you over the weekend, you dial 111, and they will link you through to those pharmacists providing emergency cover over the weekend, and you can basically go down. You don't need to get a prescription. They will be able to dispense and give you your emergency medication over the weekend. I mean, clearly you have to follow up with your GP the following week, but essentially it covers you over the weekend. And the other one, very early stages yet, but it's a follow-up new medicine service. So if you have had an appointment with your GP and you've been registered a new medicine and your pharmacist has dispensed your new medicine, one of the new services in our pharmacies is a follow-up. So in 2 weeks' time, they will contact you and follow up. How is it going with your new medicine? Is there any difficulties or problems you're having? So it's a proactive, supportive service for those patients going on to new medicines, and if there's a problem, then linking back into the GP practice. So that's where we are with delegation, and I think if I leave it there and leave it open for questions, as I say, it is early days at this stage, lots to do in terms of bringing our other primary care services into those wider integrated networks, particularly our pharmacists. But I think it's a really positive step forward.
Thank you very much. It's a shame that the national contracts haven't come to local level, because when we looked at children dentistry a long time ago, one of the major issues is the national contracts are just not very good. But anyway, we're here very late, we shouldn't talk about things we can't do anything about. Interesting stuff with the pharmacy stuff especially. I think next time when we do this, to hear a bit more about the impact of that and the benefits of that, hopefully, would be extremely useful. Really interesting to see how that develops. Philip, you had a question.
I did actually. A couple of things. Firstly, relating to what we've got on page 5 around opportunities and planning. I just want to make sure I've understood the way I've read it actually. But what it seems to suggest to me is that having been concerned about how it might affect local subsidiarity in terms of determining services when we're doing health at a strategic level for North West London, it seems to suggest we are getting an element of autonomy locally in terms of how those priorities are set and driven. Would that be a fair characterisation of what that's saying? I've got another question which I'll come back to if you like. Okay, I'll leave it there for now.
I think that is a fair reflection. It does go to the heart of the issue around the national contracts, but I think if you get sufficient drive from a local level up that you want change, and particularly I would say the dental contract more than the pharmacy or the ophthalmic contracts in particular. I think the dental contract really needs a good look at it. I think that local autonomy, that local drive will help shape some of the national conversations, because we can push where it is really not working for patients locally. We can push that message right up, because if you are doing it at a very wide, London-wide perspective, you are losing all the local nuances in terms of accountability and authority.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Paul, if you want to go. Mike on, please.
Thank you. I know that you've had a review on children's dentistry, well, oral health beforehand, but I just wanted to know what happened, what we're doing now, because it feels like that it just gets worse and worse and worse, and I feel a lot of that is down to parent education. And I used to get angry that the schools used to supply sweets to the children when I didn't at home. So I just kind of want to know what update has happened to do that.
So I would say very little to date, but I think a key conversation with the directors of public health is a very important starting point. In addition to that, there has been over the last 2 years, so 22-23 and this year 23-24, what they call population health funding has come to Northwest London, and we've got local programmes and priorities for delivery against that population health funding, and the hypertension is a whole programme funded through the population health management funding. We absolutely have had conversations over the recent weeks, actually, in Hillingdon around how we begin to drive our priorities for population health management programmes in Hillingdon, and children's oral health is absolutely up there in terms of where we might want to prioritise going forward in the future. We have had a full programme of work in 22-23 and this year in 23-24 around falls. We've done, as I say, the hypertension community engagement. There's a whole range of stuff. But actually, I think as we go forward into the next years, children's oral health will start to become, in Hillingdon in particular, but I think across the whole of North West London, will start to become a real priority, and it will be driven through the population health management, but it will also be driven through DPHs.
I mean, actually, at our next meeting, we're going to get a report back on the review, and I mean, what we discovered during the review, to be honest, some of the biggest things that can be improved are sort of beyond our level, like a London-wide and also a national level. Also with the schools, it depends on the school's appetite as well, to be honest. But we'll talk about it more next week. But yeah, thank you. Okay, last but not least, I can't even speak. Lisa from Hillingdon Health Watch. Thank you for being so patient. No, thank you, and it's really good to get an update on all the stuff Hillingdon Health Watch is doing, and we come across each other a lot at all these different meetings, which is really great because you guys are the sort of voice of the patients and what's going on, and I know, for example, on our own sort of in-depth review, it's been really helpful to talk to you about that stuff, so it's really great to hear about what you're doing. When the annual report's published, do send it to Nikki so she can send it to all of us to read. So, and if there's a party for the 10th anniversary, also let us know. Just parties are good, aren't they? Probably won't go as long as this meeting, the party, though, will it? But anyway, Philip, you had a question.
I'll take that as a hint, Chairman, but I'll try and I will be brief. I mean, it's great that it's 10 years. I remember setting the thing up initially. I think you make a tremendous contribution to the health and social care economy in this borough. And I think certainly for us as members on this committee, it's our statutory duty to scrutinise health partners. It's not to be taken lightly. So having you here really just to help send checks of what we're hearing. I'm not saying we get told things that aren't correct, but sometimes it's just worth having another perspective, and it does add value. So I would thank you for that. A couple of quick questions around whether harnessing technology is perhaps presenting opportunities or could present opportunities in terms of how you reach out to the wider community and get feedback. And also, do you still have a physical presence in the town centre now? Because I'm not quite when I last looked at the pavilions, it was shut. So where are you with that, please? Thank you.
Great stuff. Okay, no more questions. Fantastic. A massive thank you to all of you for spending so long with us. I know it's a long meeting. In the past, when I first joined the committee, they used to do this over 2 days. But I put a stop to that, which I'm still not regretting right now. Some people, our next agenda item, people are probably regretting that decision, but never mind. But it is really useful to hear everyone together, chatting together about all this stuff to give us a wide picture, because there's so much that goes on in health service that, until I joined this committee, I didn't know. So thank you very much, and you're all free to leave. And we'll see you again in 6 months' time. Right, okay, thank you so much for waiting. Apologies, it was your bad luck that you had to come and speak to us at this meeting, because this is by far our longest meeting. But anyway, we are here. I hope you've learned stuff and found it all very interesting about what happens locally in terms of local health sector. Anyway, so we have Chris and Andy who's going to talk to us about the budgeting planning report for services within the remit of the Health and Social Care Select Committee. So take it away, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Councillors. So this is the first appearance at the Select Committee for the new budget cycle, where we will be updating the committee on the current challenges and the work underway to prepare for the consultation budget to be presented to December Cabinet. We will then come back to this committee in January 2024 to discuss the position presented in the consultation budget and to present specific proposals within the remit of this committee for consideration. The feedback from this committee will then be included in the budget report, which will be presented to February Cabinet, where Cabinet will be asked to approve the budget proposals to full Council. So I'll just talk through the revenue monitoring position quickly. I mean, I won't be running through the whole report this evening.
Please assume that we've read it.
But I'll provide the headlines. So in terms of the Council's in-year monitoring position, we are reporting a net underspend of 23k, with the services within the remit of this committee forecast to underspend by 782k. The underspend is primarily being driven through staffing underspends following local and national recruitment difficulties. Within the services within the remit of this committee, there are £2.4 million worth of savings to be delivered in 23-24, with this wholly being recorded as either banked or in progress, and we're currently reporting no savings at Amber. In terms of the medium-term financial forecast, so in February 2023, the Council's saving requirement to 27-28 was estimated to be 55.4 million, with the single largest factor being driven by exceptional inflation, which added £60 million to the budget gap. So within the remit of this committee, there are no specific issues, but with the driver being behind £3.5 million worth of inflation is the assumptions around the pay award and overarching contract inflation. Service pressures are forecast to add £23 million, predominantly from the impact of demographic growth, with £8 million being added for social care, adult social care demand, which is equivalent to around 2% growth in population across the service group. A further £0.7 million for public health is included as a service pressure, which is in line with the forecast increase in public health grant income. So finally then, corporate items adding just under £12 million. £6.5 million of this is being driven by the Council's borrowing requirement to fund the capital programme, and £4.1 million from the TfL concessionary fares levy, with this element of the budget gap sitting outside of this committee. So over the next few months in the build-up to December Cabinet, we will continue to work on assessing the budget gap, with inflation remaining stubbornly high, and demand pressures on council services are primarily linked to the cost of living crisis. Alongside this, we will also be exploring ways to reduce the council's expenditure through driving efficiency gains whilst protecting frontline services, primarily using the council's transformation process to formulate budget proposals that will be presented back to this committee in January. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So just for clarity, this is our first chance to ask some questions, but ultimately you're going to come back to us in January, and that's when we generally have a bigger discussion and come up with a statement that we add to the Cabinet report on it. My only point, really, it's not really a question, but it's just a point of interest to flag, which is something that I'll want to go into further in January, to be honest, is around paragraph 29. And in paragraph 29, you talk about the different 5 different ways that we're going to get better value for our money, sort of the service transformation, saving proposals from a zero-based review, effective procurement, preventing demand, income generation, all that sort of stuff. Now, within our area, of course, we're delivering statutory services, but also at the same time, beyond statutory services, prevention can help save money later on. So it's it's not just delivering statutory services and you must spend this or that, but also we're a very big spending part of the whole council budget. So essentially, I suppose what I'll be looking for in January is some detail around how those 5 different areas are going to be used within our budget area, but also to ensure that we can provide the service that we want to provide. So it's not a question for you now, but it's just telling you the question I'm going to ask in January. Okay. Anybody else? So, anybody else got anything to add? Philip, yeah?
Not really, because we haven't got too much meat on the bone. I mean, the context is very useful, but this is a standard report, which of course goes to every select committee, so we can only draw out the bones of it as we see it, really. I'll be very interested to see how we see the development of assistive technology to play a part in easing service pressures and perhaps yielding some savings and what have you. But I guess we're not going to know much about that at the moment, so yeah, I'll probably keep my powder dry for now, like you, Chairman.
Tony.
I mean, just a comment about the inflation figure. You're guessing inflation. I mean, if your projections are, what if inflation doesn't come down? This is going to throw. I mean, I'm looking at table 3, projected savings requirement detail on page 53. What provisions are there in case inflation is stubborn? What will the council do?
Thank you, Councillor. So what we're doing at the moment is we're reviewing the inflation across a various range of sources. So we've got our own advisors who help us with our treasury position. And we're also looking at all the different institutions that prepare inflation projections. The government published in August as part of the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, some inflation projections which included city-based, non-city-based, government-based. So we're looking at all of those at the moment and trying to project forward how we think that's going to impact on us. We also work with our procurement colleagues and our service operational services just so that they can see locally what's coming through the front door, what negotiations are taking place, so that we can then kind of see how the local experience compares back to the published CPI data. So when we're looking forward at those projections, we can come up with a range of where we think it's likely to land. And then between now and December Cabinet, that's when we'll kind of hone in on where we think the Council's budget strategy needs to be to ensure that we are protected against unexpected or protected against increased prices and shocks in the market. In terms of further resilience above that, we also hold earmarked reserves and general balances. Within our earmarked reserves, we do hold one specifically for inflation pressures. So the Council takes a low-risk approach to the budget strategy, so we err on the side of caution and have the inflation running higher in the budget strategy, and then we've got the backup of the reserve. So holistically, we should have this covered within the position. Clearly, there can be unexceptional shocks, but we are prepared to manage those within our kind of financial resilience piece.
The only thing that I'm kind of looking at is because earmarked reserves in a not-for-profit organisation are reserved for what they're meant to be used for. So the COVID reserves are something that I'd be interested in seeing in those budget proposals, because they have to be used for that specific purpose. And if they're sidelined into different areas because we are now post-COVID, what challenge does that bring to the budget and the council and for this particular committee?
Thank you, Councillor. So within the COVID-19 reserves, we at the beginning of the pandemic, we put money aside from that we actually had underspent within the base budget. A lot of that was from when services had to close, and then we put that so that because that was our own money, that isn't ring-fenced, but we earmarked it for COVID-19, but there was a flexibility that the council had in how that money was used. We then had a series of government grants to support us. There were probably something like 40 to 50 grants in total. Some of them were ring-fenced, some of them unring-fenced, and then we used those up as the first kind of pot of money to be used, protecting the local money, which was unring-fenced, and using that last. Within the budget strategy, we released 1.5 million into the 23-24 budget, and that was to manage the ongoing impacts that we saw in the collection fund from reductions in council tax and business rates. I think in the end of this year, we're forecasting just have something like 50,000 left in the COVID-19 reserve. So it's not really a material balance, which actually shows that those reserves have done well in order allow us to protect the kind of frontline services, protect general balances, and then to use that pot of money along with the government grant for the council to discharge its duties under the kind of pandemic recovery.
Great, good. Okay, well, I'll close this item, so you're welcome to go home. Thank you for staying around so long for us.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. Okay, so the next agenda item is the forward plan. I don't think there's anything new on there that we have not seen before. So are we all content just to go on to the next agenda item? Fantastic. And then the next agenda item is our work programme. I've got a couple of ideas of things which I'm going to run past people quickly. First of all, at our next meeting, we'll be discussing and agreeing, hopefully, our recommendations for our review. Obviously, in August, we had that meeting, which was really good to chat about what we might want to say. Myself and Nikki have come up with a draft, which, Nikki, if you could circulate by email to the committee tomorrow, and then that'll give us a week on email to finalise those. And then what I want to do is I want them to go out to people like who we've seen before coming back to our meeting next time to sort of say these are recommendations. Then after that, the report will go to the meeting after that, and if we sign it off, which hopefully we will, we can all sort our stuff, then hopefully it'll go to the Cabinet report in December, and then we'll finish it off that way. So that's the ambition for our review. In terms of actually our plan of future meetings, a couple of observations, or ideas anyway. Our meeting in March, could we invite the Cabinet member for Health and Social Care again to that?
Yep.
Because I think last year when we did that, it was a successful meeting, and it was interesting to have Jane here and hear her views about what they've done and what they're going to do in the future, and have us our chance to question. So could you send her Jane an invite? Thank you very much. I was looking at February, and I was thinking, wow, there's nothing in February. But rather than taking a well-deserved break, which we do deserve, and because I'm a hard taskmaster, I thought that might be an opportunity to do a single meeting review. And what I was proposing, and I haven't spoken to Nikki about this, so do poke me in the ribs, but I'm sure you're smiling at the moment, so hopefully we'll go along with this. But maybe in November we can decide what that single review meeting will be. So any ideas, please get them to Nikki. I'll remind people again in October before November's meeting. I think actually, listening tonight, one of the ideas we could put down is how we provide services to our different communities. That's come up a bit today, hasn't it? So, which is an interesting question, and it could be good for a single review meeting. But anybody else who's got any ideas for a single review meeting, get them to Nikki before by sort of beginning of November. Then we can discuss in November what the single review meeting will be on. So that sounds okay? Yeah. Okay, excellent. Something that I think we should have a look at is the public health. What is it again? It's the Drug and Alcohol Partnership Board has been set up by the public health team. To basically improve, sorry, I'm reading off something. But essentially, it's a board to sort of improve the situation in relation to drug and alcohol. So I think that's something that we should look at. Does everyone agree? Yeah, fantastic.
When did you want to start that?
I reckon January looks pretty good for that, because we'll all be tired and hungover. No, I'm not going to be hungover. So really appropriate to look at it now, because there's space, but it just happens to be a good month to a good sobriety month to look at such things. What do you think, Nikki?
Yeah.
January. I think January looks good. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Can you put your mic on, please? That's okay.
So, do we? I'm just looking in here. Look at like a single review on something like our care homes and our service in care homes or something like that, because that's right now we've talked a lot about end of life care and how care homes are impacted, and I don't kind of see that on the agenda.
So it's not on at the moment. We can put it down as one of the ideas we discussed for the single review. Obviously, if we come up with like 5 ideas and we think 2 are excellent, then we could do 1 this year and then 1 the following year. Interestingly, I thought the palliative care strategy stuff was a potential as well, so which obviously fits into what you're saying. So let's put that down as an idea that we discuss in November, along with the delivering services, health services, to different communities, and any other ideas that people come up with. I think that's it from me, really. Any other thoughts on the work programme at the moment? You're happy with it? Okay.
Just wanted to mention that we're going to be moving the 2023-25 BCS Section 75 Agreement, the Cabinet Report, to the meeting on the 21st of November, so that it ties in with the carer support services and the carer strategy update, so it all ties in together then. Hope that's okay.
Okay, so if everyone's happy, I can bring this meeting to a close. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.